Hello, everyone. It's Saturday, so that means we're streaming. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to the watch along, everyone, for coming in. How's it going, Wesley? Hey, Vash. Hey, Alt, how are you guys doing? Hey, Sam, how are you? Today may or may not be a small stream. We'll see, because something I started last week. If you haven't already watched it, I really encourage you to watch it because I had a ton of fun making it. I also underestimated my ability to talk for an extended period of time about something I'm really passionate about, and that is the Breath of Fire watch along. Because something I want to do is at the end of the series, I want to go ahead and rank the games, but not just rank the games, just a very boring review. Really chew on each of them, refresh our memories by watching along the entire journey from the first game to the last game, and then really ranking them and comparing them in what they all share in common. And then at the very end, still dashing in what I personally preferred. I had a ton of fun, and yeah, we're going to do that again. Hey, Franz, how are you? Now, this is Parasite Eve. There's only three Parasite Eve games. Technically, there's two, and then there's a third one, because the third one was not called Parasite Eve. But at the same time, in this trilogy, we're still going to go ahead and watch all three. I'll be talking along the way, probably just refreshing my memory or commenting on things that come to mind. And at the same time, we're going to go ahead and pull up in Tier Maker, talk about the real things that are really binding all three games together, like actual apples to apples things we can compare, and then go ahead and rate all of them, and then just put an order and a little bit of number to them, and we'll see how long this is. Now, these won't be as long as last week, so if we run short on the stream, I'm not sure. Maybe we can just do a couple other tier lists. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. It's a duology with three games. I mean, that's you're not wrong. The novel, we're not doing the novel. I never read the novel, to be honest with you. I heard there were two novels, but I don't know. But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Let's see what we're looking at here. There were other people that last week pointed out some good things on not just Parasite Eve that we're done with. Technically, we're also done with the Chrono series because there's Chrono Trigger, Radical Dreamers, and Chrono Cross. That can be another stream. Technically, Drakengard is done, though I kind of almost want to do Drakengard alongside Nier. What do you guys think? Is that fair? It's also hard to say because Nier isn't technically dead, but it also there's no news on it. If anything, they're just cashing in on crossovers. It's hard to say. There was a movie adaptation to the novels as well. I heard that. I really do feel that they need to go together. Yeah, I agree. Maybe I should wait until I recap the revised version of Replicant. So after I do Replicant, we can go ahead and do it because that way we'll have Gestalt and Replicant, even though it's very slightly different. But the extended ending of Replicant makes it different enough to be, and like the changes they made to the quality of life, that is worth comparing. And if anything else comes to mind, let me know because as we finish up series is this will be fun to just kind of do. I honestly I really like this. I like this opportunity to talk to you guys, like you guys chiming in, and we can discuss these games. It's a fun time. It's almost like a book club. Is it Gusiom? I don't think I recognize the name. I probably butchered that, but hey, welcome to the stream. Thanks for coming in. So let's get started. Released by Square in 1998 on the PlayStation, Parasite Eve would be a horror game with action and RPG elements. Written and directed by Takashi Tokita, who also helped write and direct Chrono Trigger, the game was a sequel to the novel of the same name by Hideaki Sena, and would be Square's first game to be rated M for mature. This might have been one of the ones where I was sick when recording. Hey Javier, how are you? Because I think I sound kind of nasally in this one. For gameplay, the player fast travels to specific locations across the city, where in battles or random encounters and conducted. Everybody always talks about like, oh, look at the monster transformations. One of the things I don't give Parasite Eve 1 credit for is the story and theme itself, because it is just an adaptation. while there were some original things this did, even though I didn't read the novel to really compare the two, it doesn't change the fact that the overall premise, the idea, the sci-fi doesn't well, the reason why it's barely audible is because I don't want to talk over literally myself, because that's what I'm doing and I don't want it to be like a big muddle of sound. But I don't know. You have to put this into context of when this came out, you know?
The game begins in New York during Christmas Eve 1997, where police officer Aya Brea is on a date attending an opera.
These models look so PS1.
The songstress spots Aya in the crowd, and soon after, her singing suddenly sets fire to the actors on stage and members of the audience. As the opera house and those in attendance burn,
one of the things you have to wonder is why exactly did Eve choose to go crazy there? Like, was it the resonance with Aya?
unaffected by her song and comments that she should be awakening soon.
Because that's pretty much what it is, but it makes you wonder, okay, well, if this was here, how come she didn't activate earlier? Like, why did she seek her out, since she clearly can sense her?
Noting they actually know each other already. A memory from when she was a small child in the hospital flashes in her mind, and in that moment, Eve escapes.
As a fan of The Thing, I love the transformations. Me too. The Thing is one of my favorite horror movies out there. Not just for writing, but also for just creature effects. But one of the things that's just kind of overdone and played is that quote-unquote rat transformation. People talk about that like they talk about the dogs in Resident Evil. It's like, ah, that part really got to me. But they overstress it to the point where I can't help but wonder, did you just play the beginning and then you never finish the game? Because when people keep overemphasizing the beginning, like the cold open, I can't help but think like you played the cold open, you got your shock value out of it, and then you never finished the game. Because that's not even the most egregious transformation, or even the most shocking part of this game. So when it's brought up, I can't help but think like that's the case. Sewers, by the way, are never exciting levels. Look at this effort to be cinematic. What was this, 1997? I think.
The next day, Aya insists some sort of ESP from Melissa.
Look at those character models. Them pixels. Look at that. Look at those tight pants Aya's wearing.
As the sole survivor for the incident, Aya joins Captain Baker in a press conference.
At one point, this was considered peak graphics, by the way.
This was a terrorist attack. However, Aya chooses to reveal that the actress Melissa was
people often want to go ahead and say, oh, you know, I don't like how they sexualized Aya in like any of the games, but you have to realize that was the goal the entire time. I distinctly remember when I was looking up this game and looking at material for it, there was like covers from the very beginning of various news outlets saying like Square sexy new thriller game. It's like, and they showed like a very, you know, promiscuous version of Aya, and it's like they knew exactly what they were doing. Don't give me that crap. And then like the, you know, the naked shower scenes, they knew the fan service they were going for. Don't give me that crap. People also want to say that Parasite Eve 1 was a lot like Resident Evil. That is not true. The pattern with which Parasite Eve 1 goes through in both its gameplay and its story and its level design are not like Resident Evil. That's Parasite Eve 2, and we'll get there, that plays and drives like Resident Evil. Parasite Eve 1 does do a lot more original stuff, especially with the combat. The combat I quite frankly think is absolute crap. Fun fact, Parasite Eve started as a prototype of Final Fantasy VII. I mean, so did Xenogears, so did Chrono Trigger. There were like 3 or 4 games that started out as Final Fantasy VII, including the sequel to Final Fantasy VI they wanted to make, that weird tech demo. That was also a prototype for Final Fantasy VII. There were like 4 different instances of Final Fantasy VII before Final Fantasy VII came to be. But the way that they wanted to do it in Parasite Eve 1, the combat system, is a really poorly designed one. It's a creative battle system, but it doesn't serve a point because you have 3 different ways you are being limited. You're being limited. So like, look at these transformations. Like these to me, like when they were slaughtering the crowd and like emulsifying them and turning into a blob, that to me was a much more interesting scene, by the way. These levels, by the way, and these bosses, like the bosses prompted you to be mobile, but right there where you saw you had to stop and then pull up a menu and then use your abilities, the fact that you had to pause what you're doing, use weapons that required ammo that also required reloading, or a limited amount of MP systems, you have 3 constraining aspects to your combat system. That is unnecessary. Especially since they don't add a strategic level to it.
He explains
That
that
was just a
scientists
very
wanted to
bizarre
neutralize
version
it,
of
but
them
scientists tried
trying
to culture the
to
liver cells in order
create
to keep them
real-time
calm. They
combat
named the
while
cells
still doing
P, but
menu-based
found that the
stuff
liver
because they
cells
did
were
want to do
required
that.
for the
Oh, okay, well, our
mitochondria
crowd really
simply to
likes the
hold the
menu-based
physical
combat
diet.
systems. How
Eve
can we
then
do
tried to
that
convert
here?
the ultimate being as
And
her host body without
ironically, they
lasting
should
long.
have
In
copied
addition,
Resident
Wyatt was
Evil,
actually
which
the
they
organ
did
donor,
do in
and
the
after the
second
accident,
game.
her kidneys were used in a young girl, who was then used to also give birth to an ultimate being.
Needing to
We
reload
see
is not
Eve just like
necessary
Maeda
in
here,
this
but
game
Aya cannot help
because
but
you're
wonder if she
pausing
was also
combat to
Eve
do
as
an
well,
action
as thoughts
that
of her as a
combat already
potential
pauses
sibling Maya,
for.
who
You
died in a
don't need
car
that
accident
many
almost a month later.
interruptions to the action
On
flow
the
of your
third day,
combat.
Maeda joins Aya and
That's
Daniel in their
that's too many
investigation, as most
microsystems.
of the
3 is
city is
too
now
many.
evacuated in response to this
They
massive
should have either
monster
had
combined
ammo
with
as
the
an
continued
action
mutilation events.
or
Obtaining a
reloading
sample of Eve from Aya's
and let
blood,
you just
Daniel
kind of
performs a few
freely
tests in
move.
Dr.
That
Clamp's
was
lab
not
along the way,
necessary.
and explains that normal mitochondria cannot take control of a cell's nucleus, but Eve's mitochondria have indeed undergone massive
And
evolutionary
again,
changes.
the writing here is probably
Aya
the most
must perform blood
fascinating, especially
testing
with the
and
characters
finds that while
introduced,
she is
but
infected
at the
with Eve's
same time,
mitochondria,
it's
her
not
own
an original
mitochondria bring
story.
them back with their own power.
It's an
They aren't sure
adaptation.
why Aya is special, but are
We can
interrupted
more
until her birth
accurately gauge the
returns, when
story of
suddenly leaving
Parasite
their lab.
2 and Third
He
Birthday,
examines
because that
Aya's
at least
blood
is
just to
original
verify
writing.
its state, somehow suspecting the blood came from Aya.
To
However,
me,
Daniel
the
halts him
the
and says
combat
that he
system of
sucks at
Parasite
making a
Eve
list
2
of
was
Wyatt's
so
computers
bad that
alongside
I was
other victims
legitimately
nearby.
upset that they
But Grant
reused it for
refuses to
Vagrant
explain
Story.
why, and at a
Because in
stalemate
Vagrant
they all
Story, it
leave.
made even less
They return to
sense
the
for what it was
precinct,
trying
only
to
to be
do.
surprised to
Because
find
in
that
Vagrant
Daniel
Story,
has
it
been
didn't
taken
matter
away.
where you were. And at least in
Finding most
Parasite
everyone
Eve,
on
you
the
had
stage has been
you had
killed,
bosses
he
that would
follows the
shoot
trail of Daniel's
area of
son,
effect
who is
attacks.
protected by the
Like
chief,
especially in this
as the
dogfight
station's
over
dogs
here.
have also been
Like
claimed
on
by
this one, you
Eve
actually
and
had to keep
transformed into
moving, so
grotesque
that actually made
monsters.
the element kind of cool.
After reclaiming the police station, the next day, Daniel is
But
put in charge, and the
you didn't need to
surviving
do that in
officers
Vagrant
are on
Story. You
board
could
with
have been like a
Ryan and
mile away
Susan.
from the enemy,
Ryan
and
suggests
your
this is
attacks would
just
still
a
hit it.
distraction, as
Like
Eve's body
the
is
system combat system they
unrecoverably
use in
numb
Parasite
and
One
is
and Vagrant
likely
Story
while
was just
seeking out a
not
sperm
good.
bank in order to give
And
birth
I'm
to the
so
ultimate
glad that they
being.
do not use
Daniel
it at
also still
any
finds
game
Dr.
past
Clamp
this
oddly
point. Square was
suspicious,
smart
and
to
so they
dump
split up
that.
to chase these leads,
They were
with Aya
experiments.
seeking the nearby
They were
hospital
certainly
for the son's
different.
Eve.
They were not
As
good.
Maeda travels with her, Aya asks how the ultimate being in Japan died, and Maeda explains there was a cellular rebellion, as the mitochondria passed from the father's sperm did not connect to the ones passed from Eve, and so it deteriorated after being born.
I think because this
Finding
game
signs of
used,
Eve, they enter a
fixed
hospital
camera
where they see the
angles
little girl
and
again, wondering if it's Maya.
tank
Eve
movements
is
is
aware
why
of
people
Aya
wanted to
trapping
relate
her and
this
almost
to
turning her into a
Resident
sandwich,
Evil.
as Aya now sees visions of not only a young Maya, but herself too. Entering one room, she is shocked to see it's the same one as from her fragmented memory. Making her way to the sperm bank, she finds the same list of names that Dr. Clamp
Sperm
had,
bank. How many
alongside
times do I
patient
say
records
that in
of her own mother,
recapitations?
sister, and Melissa, both of whom happen to be admitted to the hospital on the same day. As the military prepares to launch an attack on the Blob in Central Park, Aya notes the sperm bank has already been raided.
But I
and
do have to
taken
give
from
credit
the
to
raid.
it being
Eve
set as sort of
effortlessly
modern day.
improvises
That's something
pellets
you
of
still don't
alien
see
jets,
too often
destroying
these
them all,
days.
and forces Aya to bail as the wreckage crashes upon the rooftop as Eve once again leaves to give birth. Meeting up with Daniel and Maeda, they give chase, and on the way, they learn that someone from the hospital is selling the list of names
Hey, Lynn,
and
how are
patient
you?
records they found, and Melissa had been making late-night visits to the museum. On the fifth day, signs are pointing to Dr. Clamp, and their search leads them to Chinatown. Maeda finds evidence of Eve
Like
traveling
a
into
stiff ass
disorders, so
movement,
Aya
Jesus.
comes down,
Most of these
leaving them
dungeons,
inside
by
the
the
museum,
way,
and
like
encounters
this
more
is really what you were
aliens
fighting
and
against was pretty normal
However,
enemies like
as the
bats
slime
and
collects
snakes
itself again,
and
the
like
stain drops
bears.
into the
You weren't
reservoir,
constantly
poised to
fighting
infect the entire
monsters.
city.
And
Finding it
these
out,
quote
she
unquote
chases it into the
dungeons
subway
were
system
not the most
and notices
interesting.
it's making its way in the direction of the
They were
museum.
trying to
Hastening back to the museum, Aya is surprised to
gamify,
find new books
real
and
life
monsters
locations,
taking
like
shape
even
of
like the
new
Chrysler
dinosaurs
building
now.
later.
Seeing
The
the
museum
slime
level
does
idea
seem
was
intimate
nice,
and
but
animate the
they didn't do
monsters.
anything functionally interesting
She
with
runs into
them.
Maeda, who's been
What they
investigating
did was
Dr.
they did
Clamp's lab,
theme the
learning
enemies
that
though
he's
with the
discovered
area they were
rhinos
in.
in
So
the
you had
freezer,
like
and Clamp
skeletons
hasn't
attack you in the
infiltrated the liver cells for
museum. You had
years.
like like a
In
crocodile
addition,
attack
he
you
was
in the
researching
sewers.
artificial sperm
You
that
had
could give
like
without
woodland
worrying
creatures
about
like bears
offending
attack you in the
mitochondria. He
park.
took these findings to
But
the
for the
hospital
most part,
artificially
you were
inseminating
really
monsters
running in
into
a very
sperm men
barren
before they
area.
could
It
talk, while
progressed
Clamp
like a
interrupts
Final
them and attempts to
Fantasy
attack Aya,
game
who
for this
Daniel
time.
saves her.
Like all three of the
Confronted,
PS1
Dr.
Final
Clamp
Fantasy
confirms that
games
he has been
drove more
helping
like
Eve create
Parasite
the
Eve
ultimate
1.
being.
They were really
Until he
pulling
stopped her
from from that
interfering
inspiration more
anymore.
than
He
anything.
allows Eve to immolate his body, but Clamp sees Aya is indeed unaffected as he dies. With nothing left in her way, Aya dashes to the
To me, the
expanse
most
where she
interesting
feels
thing
steady
of
and
Parasite
waiting
Eve
to
is the
give birth,
meme of
logging Aya as she
mitochondria being the
approaches.
powerhouse of the cell.
Unfortunately, Eve shows she is still one step ahead. Summoning
Like
forth the
typical
slime
Square
from
Enix,
above
the
and avoiding
emphasis
the
is
invading
on
giant,
very
smashes through
impressive
the wall of the
visuals for the
museum and
time. Like
sends
for
the
the
chaos
time,
into
these
the world.
cinematics are very
As Aya
impressive.
regroups
They
with the
don't
others,
age
they
well
share more of what they've
because they
learned,
again
mentioning that
emphasize
originally,
cutting
Eve
edge
originally
visuals for
told
the time.
Maya
Whenever
that
you go
Maya
cutting
died
edge
in
visuals over
accident and was
style,
a young
you're gonna
clamp
look
who had
bad.
just
You're gonna
taken
get
time
absolutely
outside
very
to
quickly.
observe the
These look
operation.
aged.
The doctor shouted how unusually
But the
hostile Eve was during the
creativity with some
operation,
of it
and since
is
then,
probably the most
Eve waited for
lasting
Maya to
impact because
listen,
again to this day
where she
people
was
still
certain to take
remember
over with
the
Maya's
visual
mitochondria.
creature
As they spot the giant creature, it
aspect
turns
of it,
into a
even though a
shield
lot of these
monster.
creatures quite frankly
While the
aren't
Navy
that
does its
interesting.
best to destroy it, their efforts are in vain.
Gotta have a helicopter pilot
Surprisingly,
death.
the group is contacted to report to the Navy's aircraft carrier nearby, and stepping aboard, the admiral there asks Aya to be the one to drop a nuke from
Look
the
at the
chopper,
angry
since
face on
she's
your
the only
partner.
one immune from
He's
the
just this
ignition
angry
effects.
face on.
Agreeing, Aya joins a formation that
He's like, I'm
rushes
too old
down
for
the
this
giant
shit.
monster, which has taken position next to the Statue of Liberty. Though her
The
entourage
emphasis of
falls, Aya
everything
manages to
interesting being in a
disarm the
cutscene
monster,
because the
striking
gameplay
it
can't
free,
support it.
blowing its head off and
Classic
blasting the creature
Square
back into
move.
the Statue of Liberty, toppling it over. However, before they can celebrate, from the slime emerges an evolved Eve, unharmed, and quick to respond, Aya parachutes down from the helicopter to finish the job. Eve gloats again that mitochondria have been in control this entire time, allowing humans to flourish and create an environment perfect for them, only serving as hosts for transportation. As the usher for a new age of mitochondria ascends to a greater form, New York cop Aya evolves just as quickly to match and overcome as its natural.
And then Aya gaining her powers,
As
you
Eve
know.
finally breaks down and dissolves into slime, Aya points out evolution doesn't always mean following the same path.
I kind of wish they didn't emphasize visuals so much as they did the gameplay mechanics of what you actually did.
And realized too late that the giant creature still splattered across the island was the uterus for the ultimate being, and it was
Uterus,
still
that's
alive.
another word I
As
don't
an
say too
oversized
often in a
baby emerges,
recapitulation.
crying from the slime, igniting everyone around it. Evolving quickly, it heads straight for Aya, who knows she is the only one who could oppose it now.
I like how she says she's the only one that can oppose it, but like you can shoot it with regular munitions. I know they didn't before, like, oh, it ignited like the like missiles and stuff like that, but that doesn't stop things from like, you know, shooting regular bullets at it. Like,
sacrifices himself to deliver those bullets to Aya, burning up as he gets
he's like,
closer
I have
to the
special
wall
bullets. The
of
dude falls
bullets
from a
inject the
helicopter,
pure form of the
is
monster,
lit
but
on
still not enough
fire,
to kill it,
makes a
and flies around
fastball
its face.
throw directly at
Seeing no
Aya,
other option,
nails
Aya
it,
faced the
and
creature
dunks
towards
himself in the
ship,
ocean before he
going to the
dies
ship's
in
engine
midair.
room and
What a
overloading it to
champ.
self-destruct. Escaping the
Your
explosion
partner's the
just
real
in time,
MVP.
she joins the others, including Daniel, who survived, surveying the wreckage.
And Daniel, like,
confident
look at
it's
Daniel's
over.
suit. His suit isn't even, like,
As
his
the game
tie
ends,
isn't
Maya
even
still
burned.
wonders why only she
That's some
had
high
this
quality
power. Maya
polyester.
explains part of Maya was in her too, as after the accident, part of her sister was transferred.
And then Aya
to
puts on her
Maya
jacket
as well
again.
as
I guess she,
Melissa,
you know,
specifically
put
for
it down
Maya
for the boss
Connor.
fight and went back to pick it up, even though the ship blew up.
She saw images of her, but more to the point, her mitochondria likely experienced
I say
a
Maida.
evolutionary change within Aya, and instead
Or
lives in
Maeda. I
one
think I say
of her own.
Maeda here, and it's
Maida
Maida,
also mused
as they
that
say it
this is a
later.
dark message that the
Yet another time where I
mitochondria are to
mispronounce
humans
names.
as humans are to the earth, in which they are but parasites to their host. Letting that comment fall, a group looks up as the sun rises on a new day. Later, the friends attend another showing of the opera.
The reason why I often say the sun rises on a new day really is because many of these games end with like a sunrise. And see, this is the part right here, the ending right here.
Parasite Eve has enjoyed the
Okay, I'm gonna
success of
pause
selling
this.
over 2.
So this ending right here, I had to put a wall of text up. I had to put a wall of text up here, which I thankfully don't do much these days, because there's two endings here. Franz, am I sure? No, they directly say Maida in the third game because it's voice acted, and that's why I count, you know, retroactively correct myself. They say Maida, like Maida multi-tool. And so you have two endings for Parasite Eve 1. Again, I don't know which one is more accurate to the book, but Gotcha, the third game is its own thing. It may be its own thing, but it's still the same character with the same name. It doesn't change anything. But in the first one, we have two options. We either have the regular ending, in which case Aya basically embraces her fully evolved powers and uses it to basically control everyone else. She becomes the true evolution of what the Parasite Eve was trying to do. She becomes the real, I'm not really bad guy, but she becomes the real font of power. She becomes the next monster. She's the final form. Because they constantly were trying to evolve against each other. They became catalysts, and she proved to be the stronger organism, and her powers became a reflection of that. But if you play on New Game Plus and you do the incredibly stupid 77 floors of the Chrysler Building, which I wanted to know because that's dumb, it's literally just the same floors over and over and over with high encounter rates against a lot of very tedious enemies, and it's a boss rush mode. I hate those. I always hate those. That's not good extra content. Well, I take that back. An extra dungeon with bosses can be good if the bosses are good. Oh, looks like we got a bot here. Sweet. I can't ban people from Streamlabs. I'd have to do it from within YouTube. Just ignore the spam bot. And the book takes place before the New York incident. The game is basically a sequel to the book. Yeah, that's what they said. Because when Maida is talking to her in the apartment, he explains the events of what happened in Japan, which were the events of the book, and then happens over here. Like, this is like, oh, this is what happened because parts of her came over here and they got transplanted into her, and then she became this, and then she's related to you, and blah blah blah. But in this other one, then she discovers like original Eve in Maya's body, the one that she kind of almost kept aside as a safeguard. And then you have Eve who evolves, um, or Maya. And then basically, when you have her defeating, like they fight, Aya basically loses all of her powers, but in doing so, still saves Maya. Okay, I need to go onto YouTube and figure out how to ban this thing. Hold on, everyone. This is all new to me, too. Let's go over here. And and that. Okay, cool. Man, those spam bots are crazy. Reporting them as well? Yeah, good one. Anyway, they should have been deleted. So that's that. Moving on. Where was I? So the alternate ending I thought was more interesting than the original ending. So much so that I kind of wished it was the actual ending. But if we went with that ending, technically either of these endings, you can't have Parasite Eve 2. But that's funny because Parasite Eve 2 also ends in a way where it doesn't support Parasite Eve third birthday. So none of the Parasite Eve games directly or easily connect to each other, which I always find very interesting. It's like they kind of write each one off because this one is based on being a pseudo sequel to the book, and then 2 is a pseudo sequel to this, and then third birthday is a pseudo sequel to 2, but none of them directly connect to each other in a clean way. It's kind of interesting that they didn't take a very smooth approach to that. That Parasite Eve is kind of so choppy in its writing, it in itself is not consistent. The Parasite Eve franchise, again, let me repeat, is not consistent with its writing. It throws away its own consistency to create sequels, which is almost why you could resurrect this because it doesn't matter. None of these games matter to each other. They assume that they happened, but they don't assume that they happened exactly as they happened. It's kind of weird, you know? It's kind of like writing a Star Wars show and not watching Star Wars to observe any continuity with it. But yeah. In the alternate ending for New Game Plus, Aya visits the Chrysler Building, climbs a gauntlet of 77 floors, and discovers the original Eve in Maya's body. Aya defeats her, but in doing so, Eve awakens within the mitochondria of Aya, which has evolved to be stronger than Maya, which is true. Maya also awakens within Aya, because she got those cells, and fights with Eve inside of Aya, defeating her and returning Aya's body to before she was infected. So Maya awakens within that, kills Eve within Aya. So Aya can talk to Maya, but has no powers anymore. Basically, somehow neutralizing herself. So There's that. But let's keep
2.1
going.
million copies worldwide.
How long? How much
We
did it
enjoyed the
sell? Hold on.
success of selling over 2.1 million copies
2.1
worldwide.
million is a lot. That's a lot
This
even for
video was chosen by
today.
the patrons on my Patreon, so thank you very
So I
much.
have to say,
If you
like,
like what you
it
see and you
financially
want to
did
buy me
very,
a
very
favor once
well.
a month, consider becoming a patron for
This
just
came out
$1
2
a
years
month.
ago. It was
Otherwise,
1998
come
this
hang
came
out
out.
with other adventurers
Okay.
with good taste like yourself on my Discord server. Links in the description below. I'll see you in the next
So
battle.
let's jump into Parasite Eve 2. So here's the sentiment of Parasite Eve 1. People wanted this to be like an answer to Resident Evil. 2.1 million is selling more than, I believe, Silent Hill. Because I think Silent Hill only sold barely over 1 million. It sure as hell did not sell more than Resident Evil. I think Resident Evil sold like 10 million, something crazy like that. It sold a lot. Um, Resident Evil always has to be taken out of the equation because it blows everything else out of the water. So, on just its accolades alone, Parasite Eve did sell extremely well. And from what I can observe, is well received. What do we think though were the core foundations of Parasite Eve? To me, I want to say it's the story, even though the story is an adaptation. It is technically a pseudo original story, but it is still based on an existing story. I don't know. I kind of don't want to give him like full credit on this. There's just something in me that doesn't want to give Parasite Eve a lot of credit for the first game. For some odd reason, it just doesn't strike me as original as the second or third game because I feel like they're using a lot of borrowed material. Like they didn't do any world building, they didn't do any character building. They used It's almost like an asset flip. They use pre-existing assets and just put them in this different medium to complement the original. And to me, that just I don't give points for originality there. I don't want to penalize them because they did write something. They still did make stuff, but they really didn't. Like some of it was done for them. You know what I'm saying? It's like the Witcher games. Yeah, exactly. Like the Witcher games are like you love this setting, you like these characters, but they're also already written. They didn't really have they had to make the game portion of it. They didn't really have to write as much as they needed to. They got to like cherry pick, and I'm sure some of it's original, but we can't give them all the credit when it comes to the characters and the writing. Just for the first one though. The second one and third birthday are original. Absolutely original. But for the first one, I cannot give them full credit in good conscience. Maybe it's spiteful, I don't know, but that's the way I'm going about it. So I would say storytelling is a core aspect in all of them. I think that's one of the main reasons people play it, besides the gameplay, of course. Storytelling and gameplay, I think, is something that's well shared, something that's comparable across all three games. I would say creature design would probably be the next thing that people really think of when they think of Parasite Eve. What do you guys think? What are the reasons why you feel Parasite Eve garnered such a popular reception? Because 2.1 million is a lot, especially for 1998. That's a big deal. Any game selling over a million is a big deal. People forget that less than 1% of all video games sell more than 1 million copies. It is very rare to sell over 1 million. People take those numbers for granted. I'm writing down things. So I'm going to say story is a big one. Then I'm going to say combat. Really, combat is like the main thing in these games. Um, they're not really survival. They're definitely action horror. It's not survival. Even on hard mode or challenge mode on Parasite Eve, you absolutely can get plenty of resources. I remember never being sparse for ammo, or at least handguns. Say what you will about the other things you had, like assault rifles or tonfas or whatever other crap you had. I don't remember the full allotment of weapons, shotguns. You never were really that hard up for ammo. And then, Aya's powers, you build so many of them, and they're really quite effective. Some more than others, but you get stuff like healing pretty early. Depending on when Resident Evil released. Resident Evil, I believe, was 96. Because that's another important thing. 1998 places this at the same time as Resident Evil 2, I believe. I believe 98 is when Resident Evil 2 came out. But usage of creatures. I think that's an important part. So story, combat, creatures slash bosses. Because the only other thing that really that Parasite was offering is you could replay the game on challenges, and like it had like an upgrade system. There's an upgrade system across all three games. Like it gets the job done. January 1998 was Resident Evil 2. That's what I thought. So yeah, Parasite Eve 1 is coming after Resident Evil 2. Nowadays, it gave me to sell 14 million copies to Square Enix compared. Yeah, honestly, Square Enix these days, it's basically a meme for how incredibly unrealistic they expect all of their games to sell in order to justify paying all of the artists. Because that's one of the biggest expenses across Square. Ever since they were just Square Soft, they've always had that attitude of we need to focus on high profile movie quality cinematics. They really wanted to focus on that presentation, on the visuals. And to me, they still to this day pay a lot of artists to make things as pretty as possible. And everything else comes second. Gameplay, level design, storytelling, all of it is second. Oh, look, we got another bot. Man, we're killing it today. We're popular. Boop. There we go. So we have that. So we can't dismiss the fact that it obviously clearly intrigued a lot of people. I think people at that time wanted a Square Enix, like they were probably intrigued and impressed by the fact that it came out. When Parasite Eve first came out, I was not interested in it. I was definitely more into Resident Evil. When I saw Square Enix like do this, it didn't even strike me as a horror game. Like people said it was, but it's like, I don't know. Too many artists, too little craftsmen. That's basically it. It's like the Bioware meme, where they constantly claim to have 40 writers and like 10 engineers. It's like that's why our games are super like primitive and buggy for a bit. Because like yeah, as much as Bioware was written, you gotta admit technically speaking, they definitely had opportunities for improvement. But that's Parasite Eve 1. Let's take a look at Parasite Eve 2 now and see what we can string together that's a comparable pillar for what holds up Parasite Eve, identifying the identity of the Parasite Eve. Like what does it mean to be a Parasite Eve game? What does that mean? It's not just mitochondria. Vash says gets the merchandise sold. I mean, you're not wrong. That's part of marketing. All right, Parasite Eve 2.
Released by Square in the year 1999 on the PlayStation 1.
So this is
Parasite Eve 2 would
1999.
be an
1
action
year
horror
later.
sequel to the first
1
game
year
with RPG
turnaround.
elements. Written and directed by Kenichi Iwao, who also wrote the original Resident Evil, the game would be influenced by, but not based directly on, the first by the
This
original
game
author.
was absolutely
For story, the game
more of a
features the return
focus
of
on
Aya, as she
gameplay
is
like
assigned to a
Resident Evil.
case due to
This
connected to the
straight up
past.
drives
For gameplay,
like
the
Resident
combat is now
Evil. It's
action
not
oriented,
even
as enemies now appear
it's
on
not
the
even
field,
like a
and
debate.
team-controlled movement and lock-on shooting is all done in
Which,
real time.
in my
There are
opinion,
plenty of
actually made it
Parasite energy
better.
powers Aya can use
Because they didn't
besides
try
the
some
large
weird
selection of
nonsense
guns
that just
unlocked,
wasn't
such as
proven to
throwing
work.
fire or healing, as each power
This
can
is
also
where
be
I feel
upgraded
people
with
can actually
experience
compare it.
earned.
And same thing for the
Items
creature
in the game
design
can
as
either
well.
be used for an immediate effect or equipped onto Aya to provide a passive bonus. In addition, there are 3 possible endings, and once beaten,
Models
the
look
game
much
offers
better.
Game Plus, as well as 2 more
Keep in mind, this is still the
challenging ways to complete
PS1,
the game.
and look how different
The
like
story
1
levels
year
larger from
is
this, so let's cut it down to
between
size and recap
Parasite
each
Eve
one.
1 and Parasite Eve 2.
As
How
the
much
game
better the
begins,
models and
3 years after the
environments
events of
look.
the first game, as Aya has quit being a police officer in New York and now works in Los Angeles for the FBI hunting neo-mitochondrial creatures. or NMCs.
Neo-mitochondrial
Though many
creatures.
of these creatures headed west from New York, she hasn't seen any more mutant mitochondria in the vein that created Eve, and it seems the threat is almost eradicated.
I appreciate them trying
Aya
to
has been honing
recap the
her
game
skills
itself.
and parasite energy powers within the Mitochondrial Investigation and Suppression Team, or MIST, though on the night of September 4th, 2000, something is distracting her during target practice.
Even the character model
She
looks
hears from her
better.
coworker Pierce that there was an incident at the Acropolis Tower downtown, and their boss Baldwin is dispatching Aya to the scene. Pierce notices
Look at
she's
these
looking a bit
subtitle
tired, and Aya
boxes.
shares she's not been sleeping well and has
So
been having
brutal.
strange dreams about her dead sister calling
Big
for help.
thick lettering on big
Taking
thick
her yellow
boxes.
convertible, nicknamed Carrie, Aya arrives just as a helicopter spontaneously bursts into flame and crashes into the emergency vehicles below. Surveying the scene, Aya learns they lost contact with SWAT about 10 minutes ago, and entering finds them all slaughtered, though one member survived. He tells her they fought
The
against literal
Coca-Cola.
monsters, and there is one civilian he was with nearby.
You have to make
she
sure
tried
that
to
Coca-Cola
save.
can be properly
She finds a
rendered.
small creature tearing apart another officer, and with his dying breath, he cautions her they're not what they seem. Finding the
So,
civilian nearby, Aya watches
in
awe
this
as the woman
one,
transforms into a new type of monster she's never seen
I like
before,
how,
and after
even
pulling
though the
down, she
creature
examines
design
the body
isn't
to find a
as,
strange
in my
metal implant
opinion,
behind the ear.
twisted as like
As
the
she
thing
leaves,
like
the creature
like
gets up again,
visual
but
artists
just
of the
then her
first
coworker
game.
Rupert
I think the
saves her
visual
and makes
appeal of the
sure
monsters
she
in the
stays
first
dead
game
this time.
are
Seeing there are small
probably
ones
the
around, Rupert
best.
handles the cleanup as he tells Aya
But
to call for backup,
I do
but
like
while
that
she
they went with a
informs
very
Baldwin
different
that the monsters
direction,
can
sourced from a
react
very
even
different
form now, he
threat.
tells her he has
Like
no
these have a
backup
lot
to
more
send.
mechanical
With
aspects
herself
to
and Rupert
them,
on their own now, she checks the security cameras to
and
spot
they
no
look
surviving SWAT
vaguely
members.
humanoid
While unable
on
to
purpose,
obtain
rather
a
than
full
looking
crisp
very
taste of
alien,
Coca-Cola, Aya does find more monsters
very
powerful enough to
occult,
shred through body armor that
very
also has
eccentric.
synthetic
A lot of
parts in
these
them.
have
She soon
machine
finds
parts
Rupert
to
pinned
it,
down by a
or
huge
they all
person
look
in a green
humanoid.
jumpsuit who looks at Aya
And that's a
and
very
suddenly
different thing
disengages him
too.
to flees.
Like that's a very
An
different type
injured
of
Rupert
threat.
prompts Aya to pursue their attacker quickly, but has a
People
bad
also
feeling about this.
got upset
Looking
that I
around,
did a
she finds
challenge mode
Gospel,
on this
learning the
one.
prosperity of
So this
Parasite
is
as
actually
natural order,
Parasite Eve
and
on either
appears
New
to
Game
swap
Plus or
officers
Hard
she
Mode, one of the
spotted earlier
two.
on the
And
camera,
that's why you have
mentioned
people
that
like
her
the
capture
soldiers running
operation
around
has
here because
failed,
people are
and
like,
this
those
is
soldiers
looking
don't
to be a
appear in
second
this, they
New York
appear much
incident.
later in the game.
The
But when
man
you
is
play
looking
New
to
Game
someone
Plus,
who
you
gives
have
the order to
these
destroy all
dudes,
evidence, and
these
ensures
soldiers
Ruth will not
appear
be
in
an
the early
obstacle
game
because of
levels
specimen
because it's New
number
Game
9.
Plus.
The man leaves a bomb behind, and while Aya tries to
I was like,
fight,
oh
she
well,
finds
you
she
know,
must now
sorry
contend with
for
more cybernetically
playing
enhanced
this on the
soldiers
more
called
challenging
Guardians all over the
difficulty,
premises,
whatever.
all armed with guns and advanced tech like cloaking or energy swords.
Like this
Baldwin
gameplay right
calls to
here
tell
is
her
straight
she
up
needs to
Resident
detain
Evil,
the
but I
bomb
think
planted
that's
suspect, as a
better.
police
It's one of
helicopter is
those,
en route to pick
stop
her
trying
up.
to reinvent the
Climbing
wheel.
up to the roof, she is met by the green soldier that attacked Rupert, who laughs aloud, saying he's a hunter just
Especially
like her.
since
He shows her the bomb
you have much more
detonator in his hand
agency
while
there.
lighting
There's
some
not you don't
shell
have the
on fire
three
and attacking
artificial
her, but his
limitations. You
tech ends up
absolutely can
backfiring as she
still
fries it and forces
select
him to
powers
leave
very
now.
quickly. You can
As he
utilize your
leaps to another
gunplay
building,
in a
he
much
drops the
more
detonator,
effective
which is
manner.
picked up by Rupert,
You still
but the
have
bombs go
the
off anyway.
core focus of
Fortunately, they get to their chopper in
modding
time
your
to
guns,
escape the
improving
building,
them,
exploding
like,
behind them.
things like that.
The next day, after Baldwin debriefs them, he hands Aya her next assignment, which is to investigate a site in the Mojave Desert where some cattle have just been killed by NMCs. She hands the implant she found to Pierce, who reports back that it's a cutting-edge microtransmitter, suggesting that someone is controlling the monsters. More interesting is that there was
Pierce
sand in
looks
it
like
that
the type of
matches
hacker
samples
like
from the
hackers
Mojave,
are
and
expected
seeing
to
the
look
link
like
led
in
to
the
a
late
weakness,
90s.
Aya drives off.
He has sunglasses that he wears
Arriving in the
everywhere. He
small,
has a
dusty town of
ponytail.
Blythefield,
He
she
wears a
works for
vest.
locals, but finds new monsters
Probably
here
drinks
surviving in
fancy
the arid
coffee.
climate. A cautious man tells her
Like,
this town
look
has
at
been
what
overrun,
each of
and
these.
most
This,
people
by the way,
who
is a
work
scene
have
that's
either been
directly
killed or
taken from Resident
escaped.
Evil 2.
He's set up traps around town.
I
to
feel
patrol,
it's an
introducing
homage
himself as Douglas,
because the
so he
setup and the execution of the
sounds
scene,
familiar for
including the
some
dialogue,
reason.
is
He
way too
gives her a room to
similar.
rest in and tells her to be
But
cautious around the
even
mimics
that
are
weird
indeed still lurking
horse-like
in town.
monster, like it looks vaguely
Except that his
humanoid. A lot of the creatures
hospitality
here
only
look like
reflects how she
stretched
still
out
appears
humans,
youthful
and I
because of her
like that
mitochondria, but
theming
would prefer
because
to
it
live a
all
more
does tie
normal life.
together into
From
what
her
the
room, she spots a
actual
man
core
standing
source
on a
of
nearby
the
water tower who
bioweapon
introduces
is.
himself as Kyle and knows of NMCs and Mist.
This is
He adds
Kyle.
he's a private
Look at
investigator
Kyle.
checking
Kyle's
on a shelter
important.
near here,
You wouldn't tell
but
from
has
that
been stranded
face.
when the monsters totaled his car. He offers to join forces with Aya, and she accepts, continuing her investigation with the help of the official soft drink of summer, Coca-Cola.
A lot of the notes
He
and
knows the
lines
shelter
here with
Kyle seeks
Coca-Cola are
as it
actually
was
pulled from
originally
direct
dug out of a
Coca-Cola
shelter, but
advertisements.
recently it was bought by
Man,
some
another
company.
one. We're getting
Aya suddenly
bots
hears a scream,
all
though he doesn't
over.
and checks it out.
Whoever's putting
finding
these
new
in, you're
models of
very
golems and
aggressive.
cloaking creatures along the
I
way.
almost respect
She
the
finds the source of the scream
commitment
to
to
be a
your
woman hacked down by
craft.
the same number 9 from the tower, demanding to know why he killed her. He points to reveal it was no woman but a monster in disguise, and he's just doing the same
Everyone make sure to
extermination she
report
is,
these too.
adding that blowing up the building in LA and killing a few dozen was worth saving the entire city. She demands to know who he is, and he points his gun blade back at her, claiming to have stronger mitochondria. They fight, and number 9
Mitochondria is almost used
laughing
like
and recognizing
mana
her
in
connection
this
with
game.
Eve.
It's like, oh, the
Hearing
power
this
of your
name, Aya's
mitochondria
vision
is mighty. It's like your
blurs
power
as
level
she
from
gets a
Dragon Ball
massive
Z.
headache. Strange light grows out of her, and she sets number 9 ablaze.
They never
defeating
really
him.
explain that part right
She
there.
then
Like
has
where the
a dream
light
of a
comes
girl
out of
who
her
is just like
back.
Maya, strapped
They
down in a
don't,
lab and fading
to my
out as the
knowledge,
lights
ever
around
really
her shatter.
explain that.
Waking up again, sirens bellow as she is freed and leaves the destroyed room. As she sleeps, Kyle enters the room, surveys the scene, and points his gun at her. Aya quickly snaps awake and lights his gun on fire, which quickly
Dude's
spreads
arm
up
is
his
lit on
arm until
fire.
he drops it.
And
His skin
he's
isn't
fine.
burned as Aya questions where number 9 went, but there is no one or body there.
And she just,
Kyle
he
shares
just
Douglas
casually
thinks the
walks off
shelter
the
must
fact,
be
yeah, I was about to
monsters'
shoot
nest,
you in the
but
head. And she's like,
trying to
oh,
get
were you
to
about to
Aya's
shoot me in the
car
head?
and
He's like,
find
I
Carrie
was. And she's
completely
like, oh,
towed by
okay.
NMCs.
Anyway.
Douglas offers his red pickup truck, and after fixing
By the
it,
way,
Kyle
you
pauses
have to
refresh
save the
himself with some
dog.
Coca-Cola while Aya takes a nap.
If you don't save the
In conclusion,
dog,
she
you
sees the
cannot
little
get
girl
anything
again
but the
trying
bad
to escape
ending.
some sort of bunker as
Because
she's
if
chased
you,
by
the
groups
dog
of
doesn't
wolves.
survive, if you don't save
She
that
is
dog,
startled awake and takes a shower to relax, only to be disturbed by something massive. An enormous NMC taller than the motel she's in lumbers
yeah, you
forward,
have to save the
equipped
dog
with
here.
machinery to help it breathe
Because if
fire.
you don't, it doesn't matter what
Douglas
you do,
and
you
his
can play
dog
the rest of the
try
game
to fend her off,
perfectly.
but
You
it's up
will
to
you will
Aya
get
and
the
her
bad
unique
ending.
skills to destroy the monster, saving both of them. Before Aya sets off, Kyle appears just after the fight and tells Aya retroviruses, like those responsible for Ebola and AIDS, change the host's DNA. In addition, manufacturing viruses like these
It was the
produce
late
vector
90s.
viruses,
AIDS was a
means of
topical
inserting
thing.
manufactured DNA into cells, and some civilian organizations use them for DNA treatments.
This is the part that I
Then he
kind of
adds,
like,
"We need
where
to introduce
they're
them
not
to
directly
reproduction
doing the
cells. A
same
parent would
thing
pass
as the
DNA to
first
child,
game
and
in
mutations
terms
will
of
occur.
here's what the
In other words,
bioweapon
the
threat
virus
is.
triggered
They're doing
evolution.
something different.
Kyle
They're
then
talking
connects
about
that
the
NMCs
carrier
to local
viruses
lifeforms as
itself,
hosts,
and
combining
talking
the
about how,
mitochondria with the
yes, you have the
reproductive power of a
mitochondria
virus,
aspect of
resulting in
it,
this
as
outbreak.
Eve is itself, or
claims
as
the virus
I
is
keep
being
calling her
made in the
Eve. I mean, she
shelter
basically
to
is
see and
Eve,
is an
honestly.
overgrown
And that's
one.
what these are, the Eve
As
cells.
the night crawls into the next day, the truck stalls out on the way to the shelter as a
Is
pack of
she's
creatures look
evolving
on
and she has
staging
powers,
damage,
and
forcing them into a
even
nearby
Aya
mine.
is at this
Kyle is
point
injured and Aya
not in
pulls off
control of
the
her
lock
own
as Kyle
body.
gets away, though as she
Her
tries
body
to catch up,
heals,
she's concerned
her
about
body
his weapon
rejuvenates
alongside a fallen
itself,
NMC.
it has powers that
She
grow,
also
and
finds
she's
an
not
out-of-place
in direct
motorcycle
control
down
of
here that
any of
signals a
it.
nearby hidden wall, behind which reveals the secret bunker they were looking for. Exploring the facility,
Parasite
she
2
finds
supposedly
more guards
supposed to
patrolling,
have
but
voice
sees
acting, but they
another
dropped
staggering
it. The
vision
only
of a
thing
little
left was
girl
that one
running away
SWAT
from
member
her
saying
pursuers
freeze.
and
Oh,
discovering a room
you
with
know,
a
I
large
believe it.
cocoon. Aya passes through labs where experiments were performed on all manner of creatures, including humans.
I like this
sensed
mad
anger.
science aspect
Finding
of
the
it,
door
like
she
the
just saw in her
labs.
vision, she is
Labs
forced
are
into
always a
disposal
really
area where
good
she deals with
environment
the
to be
devourer
in.
of
This
discarded
trash thing,
experiments,
by the way, this was a
defeating it by
cool
trapping him
boss.
in a crusher that turned
This
him
boss
into a
was actually
sandwich.
really cool. I
However,
like the
when
scale
trapped
of the
and
bosses that they
incinerated,
had.
she
The
is
bosses
rescued
in
by Kyle,
Parasite
who
Eve
leaves to see
2
him alive,
were much more
flattering
interesting than
Kyle with a
bosses in
smile.
Parasite Eve 1.
Working their way
Like,
back
not
to the
even
shelter, Aya
close.
sees Flint and
Because in
is concerned
Parasite
about
Eve 1,
Douglas,
like,
and
your
Kyle offers
bosses,
his
I guess we'll
support
talk
as
this
she
later,
checks it
but
out
I'm
and
going to talk
continues
about it
to the
now.
shelter.
Like, you had, like, the giant
Following the
worm
dog,
that was
she
literally just an
supplies the lead to the
earthworm.
Pierce, who says
You had,
he
like,
came here to
sort
rescue
of
her,
the
but got
blob,
injured from the monster
and then
snare.
you had
He stays
constant
behind to rest his
skirmishes
wounds,
against
handing her the keys to his
Eve.
SUV, and an always
But in
refreshing
each
can
one
of
of them, you just
Coca-Cola
basically
to make
fight
this
Eve.
way.
Eve does a couple
She
things
finds
to you.
Douglas's
You do a
action
couple
fine,
things to
and after
Eve,
gunning
and then
down the
Eve
lead
flies away,
researcher,
going,
Dr.
"Ha ha
Bowman,
ha!
who
I'll beat
turned
you next
himself into a
time."
sentient
Team Rocket
monster,
blasting off
she
again. You
finds
do it
a
like 3
charred lab
times.
where she
It's
saw
not
the
terribly
girl escape
exciting.
from.
Then you had the
Beyond,
dog.
she
The
is
dog
shocked
was
to find
was an
an
interesting
incubator cultivating
boss.
cells with flasks labeled Eve as well as Aya, and finds Dr.
But that's like
Bowen's
probably the
computer.
only interesting interesting
She
one was
learns from
like
his
the
terminal
dog.
there's a plan to revitalize the human race with neomitochondria
Even the
and
final
something
form of
called the
Eve, like
second
being either
Neon
the
plan.
giant baby
The
or like
first
the
step was
weird,
to
almost looks
obtain a
like chaos
neomitochondrial
from
sample
Sonic,
with power equal to or
um,
greater than Eve's.
didn't really
Next, they would
feel that
apply
in
the
terms of
sample
like
to a
being a
test
really great
subject and
boss fight.
reassign their genetic profile to experiment
But the
and
ones in
create
here, they
multiple
had a lot more
artificial
oomph to it.
NMCs.
The
Finally,
NMCs
it would
were
unlock
a much
humanity's
more
true
interesting boss
potential through
design.
controlled evolution.
even if
She also
the
learns the
creature design
Attainment desired
itself may not have
neo-mitochondria
been
sample
as
shortly
grotesque. But
after
even
the
then,
unit
like I
was
said in the
tested,
first game,
but have had
only
problems with the
a
primary test
couple
subject
of
rebelling, and so have resorted to clones of
monsters
the
were
test
really like
subject.
that grotesque thing. Everything else
Wondering
was
who the
just like
primary
a
test subject
zombified
was, she is
animal. They
shocked
were
to
very
discover it
plain
was
and
her all
generic.
along, meaning every ANMC she's been fighting and killing has just been a mutated clone of herself.
And this, I liked this
Interrupting her is
twist.
a call
I
from
like the
Pierce, who has
fact that
recovered
this
and is now
lab
inside the shelter hacking its
recognized
mainframe.
that,
Staying focused, she
Aya
moves
is the
towards Pierce,
most
passing by the
evolved
gigantic computer
specimen
system in her
of this
vision,
thing.
and
So we're just going
observing
to
there was
take,
something alive inside.
samples from
Pierce then
her
shows Aya
and
a
literally
massive
create a
engineered
whole
ecosystem called the
family
Neo
of
Ark
weird
here in the shelter,
neo-mitochondrial
and notes
creatures
something in the
that are more
greenhouse is generating a
controllable,
massive
that we
amount
can
of energy
determine how
to
they
not only
evolve,
create
we can have some sense of
electromagnetic
control,
barrier,
we can
but
also
grow
figure
the
out how to
ANMC
fight it,
pupa
and
she
they're
saw
all
earlier.
basically
He
weird,
suggests they
bizarre
focus on
clones
cutting
of
out the
her.
generator
I
first,
like that
handing her
twist.
a
I like the
tracker to
twist that
see the
she is
location
just
of other
fighting an
ANMC
entire
and
race
showing
of
her the
things that are
facility in
just
that area.
mutated clones of
At the same
herself.
time, the
Every
President
single
of the
one of
United
these.
States receives an update that the mole they planted has found what they were looking for, and he gives the authorization to destroy it from orbit as the only way to be sure. Aya arrives
Like how it's
to
just
see there
nuke
are
it from
multiple
orbit.
biomes within the Neo Ark, and the automated tour informs her they have engineered humans adapted to each environment, using
And that's what the whole goal
viruses to
of this
deliver
was, is
neo-mitochondria and induce
we're going to
neoteny,
use
which
you as
allows
a
adults to
stepstone to
retain
evolve
juvenile
humanity.
characteristics, thus achieving
I kind of
eternal
like
youth
that.
while
That is,
allowing
to
hosts
me, that
survive
plotline is
however
also
they
very
want.
Resident Evil, where that's
However,
the
there
whole
are no
idea behind all the
ANMCs on
major
this
viruses was
ANMC
just
tour,
to
as
create the next
procedure is
step in
still
human
development,
evolution.
and
It was
those
all
test tubes
eugenics.
are still on life support in a
And
comatose state.
that is
While the
overtly
Ark has
Resident
spared no
Evil,
expense on
straight up.
security features,
This
Aya
puzzle was
finds an
stupid.
ANMC is being used as a living
It's like,
battery for
you have
everything,
3
and
sliding
also
tile
becoming an
puzzles.
override to
Like,
shut
what is
another
this? This
one
is so
down.
dumb.
Though she senses a powerful source of
Look at those
energy
big
beneath
anime
her,
eyes.
someone activates a powerful set of golem units nearby, and she
This
returns
is where the
back to
golems were
Pierce.
supposed to be
He
used.
tells her that the generators
Whatever.
she destroyed were only powering the barrier, while he suspects
But
that
I
they
like how,
passed
again,
through
they're
the pupa,
using these
called the reactor,
NMCs for,
is the
like,
queen
power,
below.
for
Unlocking an
experimentation, for
elevator, Aya
advancements
descends
on
down and is
understanding
surprised
human
to run into a
evolution.
little girl controlling the ANMCs directly.
Look at that
While
boss
the
fight.
girl
That was
is
another
cornered,
cool
Aya
boss
is
fight.
approached by Kyle, who confirms the girl is the queen they were looking for
Using
and
mind
prepares to
control,
heal her.
that's another
While
thing
Aya
that comes
steps
up,
in, she
ironically
chooses to
still in
peacefully
Resident
approach
Evil,
the
is
girl
using
instead.
these NMCs
Removing her
for
helmet,
mind
Aya is
control.
unsurprised to see the girl is her identical
And look, it's a perfect
the
clone.
one she has shared visions with, and is named Eve. Aya also notices Eve's helmet is a brainwave amplifier, enabling her to control the ANMCs per the order of the facility.
And remember
owners who
that Eve's
brainwashed
special
her.
ability is
She also
controlling
suspects
other
Eve was used
monsters.
and abused, and in
Keep
defense,
that in
raised
mind
the
because that
barriers.
comes into
Suddenly, the lights cut out and gas grenades are tossed into the room as Kyle
that's a
shoots out an
plot point
observation
later.
mirror and ushers them into the next room. Kyle holds off the golems as Aya sees more clones of herself in incubation, and Eve has a headache and runs ahead. Aya follows just to see Number 9 once again with Eve as a hostage in his grasp, thanking her for taking down the barrier and making the capture easy. She loses track of him and returns.
It makes you
to
think
Pierce,
if
who is
Number
also
9 was
gone,
also
left
kind
behind
of a
hastily written
bizarre
note
clone of
mentioning
her.
How their own boss
Very weird.
Baldwin was leaking mist data to this facility.
Ah, the agency
Finding
I'm
the
working
one exit
for
tunnel, she
actually
finds the outpost
backstabbed me and
motorcycle
selling
again
me
and
out. What a
realizes it's Number
surprise.
9's, and a teddy bear belonging to Eve is still on it. Opening the door outside, Aya is met by scores of golems who turn to attack her, with just in time the military
Because I believe that,
arrives to take them
all the
down
golems
secure
are
the
not
area.
clones of Aya.
However, a new
Instead,
barrier rises over one
they're just,
sector, preventing their entry,
benefiting
and
from
despite
the
collateral
research
damage,
done
the
on
order is sent
Aya's
from the
clones.
president to hit it with
Also,
an
once
orbital
again,
strike.
these
At the
are
same time, Aya
NMCs.
consults
You don't
a
have to be
lieutenant how
something
best
fancy
contain
to
the
kill them,
situation,
just
and
enough
tells her
bullets
she
will
could
put them
bypass the
down.
barrier they
Which
just
literally, that's what you're
discovered.
doing.
She is welcomed by Flynn outside, bearing a message from Douglas, as well as her coworker Jody, who reports Baldwin was successfully arrested and evidence was found of him being a mole alongside several other agents. Leveraging Flynn's tracking ability, Aya lets him catch Eve's scent from her teddy bear, and the canine catches her trail, leading
These
Aya
are
to
actually
also
optional
rescue Pierce
objectives.
and
I
several
forget what you
soldiers along the
unlocked. I
way.
think this is how you had
Catching
to
up to
do
where
the
Eve is
extra
in the
ending.
cocoon room, she is surprised to see Kyle is also there with Number 9, as Eve is back under their control. Number 9 says his life support is cut off and will die soon anyway, but still wants to finish his mission while the fate of the world is in his hand, intending to merge Eve with a pupa and hatch it. Doing so will create a biohazard that will induce complete global saturation of ANMC conversion, forcing evolution of humanity.
Because this guy just basically wants to jumpstart the entire project of forcing this virus onto the world and forcing everybody to become an NMC, which would directly be under control of Eve, more or less.
In fact, they volunteered for the procedure, willing to trade morality for a shot at immortality and eternal youth.
And Kyle's just a
He
mercenary
says he
slash
was
government
using her
dog.
to get to Eve, shooting Aya in the shoulder, but then quickly
Like how he
turns around
shoots
and
her in the
shoots Number
shoulder.
9 in the head while also
He's like, I just
blocking
needed to
the
make
creature
sure. It's
from
like, I
his
shot you in the arm
weapon.
because I knew you'd heal. Like, you
Getting
still
out, Number 9
shot
is
me.
furious at the double agent,
But apparently
but the
that's how
creature
you
quickly
get
consumes him
Aya to fall in
instead.
love with you.
He apologizes to them both for letting things get this far, explaining he had to play both sides in order
Uh-oh,
to figure
upskirt
out what
shot
was
of
going on.
Aya. Nobody
Kyle then
look.
calls in Evac at a
Don't flag
vent but
this
gets no
for
reply,
overly
as
sexual
Eve
content.
speaks her first words to them, directing their attention to the bright lights descending above. Firing down from space,
But don't worry, Aya's in a
mini
miniskirt this entire time. They never sexualize Aya. How dare
piercing
they?
the facility and striking the cocoon. Prematurely hatched, the giant pupa emerges from its cocoon, crying as it's born, as Aya is separated from Eve and Kyle. Kyle tells her Eve fell down and
Ironically,
urges her
they
to go
use this
on,
point
while
in
hiding the
Resident
fact
Evil
his leg was
6.
blown off
So
in the
this
explosion,
actually, I would almost say
admitting
Resident
his
Evil.
strong feelings
I don't
for
want to say
Aya.
directly copied Parasite Eve 2
Spawning
because
Eve,
nobody's copying
Aya's caught up by
Parasite Eve 2.
massive ANMC,
But like
forced to deal with
there's a
the
big
peanut
similarity
engine
there.
However, before it falls, it scoops away Eve and consumes her, rapidly evolving.
Number
into
9
a
does
new
have a gun blade.
mitochondrial
That is
Eve.
correct.
Pushed
This
to her
design of
limit
Eve was
against her
not
own
terribly
mutate
interesting,
clone,
but this
Aya
boss
wins
fight
the
was
battle, and though the
incredibly
ultimate ANMC
annoying.
tries to seize her and escape, it fails and dissolves away. Waking up, she sees Kyle and he tells
This
her
is how you
time to
get the
save
good
and
ending.
sound, though when he begins to talk more, she fades out. As
This
the
part is
military would
such
find and rescue the
ham.
duo,
I
the next day,
don't
the
like
president
it.
would be briefed on the success of Aya and the team's actions. The public would be told this incident was a cultist nuclear attack, and evidence linking it to the Manhattan incident was being removed. However, their mole has declared his resignation and disappeared, and so the order to hunt him down as a loose end is issued.
I do
As the game
appreciate
ends,
that the
another year
government is
passes,
saying, all
and
right,
the FBI
eliminate
has
Kyle,
arrested several
because that's very
suspected
much
agents in collaboration with
100% will be
classified
true.
private organization. Everyone involved would be hit with a gag order, and the public report would be suppression of an armed cultist uprising. Rupert would assume the senior post, though he was also
I always
secretly
like
working with
wrap-ups
Jody
like
on leaking
this,
mist
even
and
if they're
AMCs
not
to the
terribly
public.
important.
Japanese biologist Dr. Maeda would propose a
See,
new
I say
superhuman
Maeda,
theory
and that's
in
wrong.
relation
It's
to
Maeda.
mitochondria, though it would not be widely received, although Pierce would believe him and assist his endeavors.
Pierce would open a net
Rupert
cafe.
would also arrange things so that Eve would legally be registered as
Look at
Aya's
Eve's
younger
E.
sister and is now attending junior high. In addition, as she recovers mentally, it also seems she lost her neomitochondrial power somehow.
Which also
Douglas
does
and
not
Emmett
work
both
with the
survived destruction
sequel.
of Dry
Eve does
Field and
not
are
lose
now
her
working to rebuild
powers.
it.
Also,
On
how do you
September
just
1st,
lose your
2001,
powers,
Aya and
especially
Eve
when they're
take a
based
trip
on
to
like
New York to visit the
literally
Future
your
Museum,
organisms
where they would be
themselves?
surprised by the
I don't
reappearance
know,
of
whatever.
Kyle with a prosthetic leg, and happy to be reunited and move on together. Parasite Eve 2 has enjoyed the
This part I
success of
thought was
selling over
a
1.2
dumb
million
ending.
copies worldwide.
Just
Thank you for watching this recap. I
Aya apparently like allegedly falling in love with Kyle, and like that's the happy ending. I don't buy that for an entire second. Like, yeah, right. Not for one moment in this entire game did they ever build a relationship to where I could plausibly believe that they in any way, shape, or form fell in love with each other. That part was just so ham-fisted. Like if you just had Kyle get gunned down to the side and nobody saw him again, and then Aya is just enjoying a new relationship with her literal younger clone, who for the time being seems, I'm not gonna say her powers are gone, I'm gonna say her powers are dormant. I think dormant is the more correct way of just, writing this off. Is her powers went dormant. Uh I would have much preferred that ending. Kyle did not deserve a good ending. There is no chemistry, exactly. All three of these games barely fit together. It's all just superficial. It kind of is, and that's why I kind of have to criticize the whole franchise. Wouldn't you agree? It is the thinnest of strings that connect all three of these games. And that is just not strong. There's no core foundation here. But what similarities, when we think about it, is there to the very first one? Obviously, there's storytelling, obviously, there's combat, obviously, there's monster design. And those are something we can really compare. But you can say that for just about any generic action monster game, couldn't you? What are we examining in Parasite Eve that makes Parasite Eve unique? If we were to, let's go ahead and throw it out there. What would we want to see in a, let's just, throw it out there. Say they were going to make a new Parasite Eve game. Say they got the money, they actually bought the license to use it. Or they didn't even call it. They called it like the 4th anniversary or some nonsense like that. Because I think they're still allowed to use the names and the characters and likenesses. They just can't say Parasite Eve. What would you want to see that would make it quote unquote feel like Parasite Eve? Because I don't know about you, but from the first 2 games alone, there's only 2 games that actually say Parasite Eve, I don't really detect an IP identity. I'm not seeing anything iconic that really removes this from being just another game about monsters, about just shooting monsters and having, science powers. Memes aside, I'm really not seeing an iconic identity to Parasite Eve. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's really just the specific detail of it being quote unquote mitochondrial based, Mitochondria Eve, as the original book is, if that's really it, then that's pretty damn weak. Because then that's really no different than just any MacGuffin name for a zombie virus, you know? It really doesn't matter what you name it. Because the level design was very different from Parasite Eve 1. And when you have a sequel that does something very different from the original, yet still called the same thing, you don't have a lot of direct comparison you can make. It almost allows the third game to do whatever it wants because the second game did whatever it wants. It chose to innovate rather than uh, refine what the first game did. I mean, they did keep some things like the option New Game Plus, replayable challenges, weapon crafting, but those are just mechanics. That's like saying I had a fishing mini game. The biological themes in the story, Gyogre not sexualizing Aya and make her a badass with powers that are in line with what she's displayed. But Gyogre, Aya is sexualized in both games that she's in. That if anything, that's more consistent with Parasite Eve. You have to sexualize Aya. That's how she was originally designed. That's literally in the opening marketing. Is literally their words, like a sexy thriller. They put it on the cover. They know what they're saying. Where they put her in short mini skirts or bunny suits or sexy cop outfits or um, have the shower scenes. That's in both the first two games. That is absolutely part of the core identity, is having a sexy female protagonist. If anything, I would argue that the sexy female protagonist is part of the Parasite Eve identity. I think if you did not have a sexy female protagonist in a new Parasite Eve game, people would say that doesn't feel like Parasite Eve more than the opposite. Wouldn't you say? But the biological themes, maybe the science aspect of it, like the science being based on bioweapons, because that's what actually is part of Resident Evil. Resident Evil is not about zombies. It never has been. It's always been about bioweapons. They've always termed them as BOWs, bioorganic weapons. That has always been the case since the very first one, even to the most recent one. People think it's about zombies because again, these people only play for a little bit and they don't finish it and they bail. So all they encounter was like a couple of zombies and maybe a zombie dog, and that's all they do. That's like the grunt. That's like thinking Halo is about fighting a couple of grunts. No, that's not what it's about. It's about the bioorganic weapons. Is Parasite Eve about the bioorganic weapons slash the creatures? Yes, yes, it is. Is the source of it important? Yes, I would say that it is. The source of it being science based, I think the science behind it, the way that it's written, that I think is an important part of the Parasite Eve identity. There is no overall identity to the IP, then how can we argue that a game is or is not a Parasite Eve game? One of the biggest complaints I hear about Third Birthday is it doesn't feel like a Parasite Eve game, or to use the very popular and very incorrect label, quote unquote, character assassination. I'm going to do this rant again when we get to it. But anybody who says Aya's character is character assassinated in Third Birthday didn't A, play Third Birthday, or B, understand Third Birthday. Understand that Aya's character is in no way compromised in Third Birthday at any point in the game. Keep that in mind. And that's not me protesting, that's literally what happens in the game. Parasite Eve is strongly connected to the theory of evolution if humans deserve to survive. I think that's probably more to the point, Gusium, is not necessarily the bioorganic weapon part, even though the creature design is part of it, of what makes the games, like Parasite Eve, is more about the overall theme of human evolution. The theme of human evolution. Because that is a big part of Parasite Eve 1, and that is absolutely a part of Parasite Eve 2. And we should watch Parasite Eve 3 to see if that overall theme of human evolution is still there. I think you might be the closest there. There's more to Resident Evil than simply zombies and monsters? Absolutely. Always has been. But I dare say that having a sexy female protagonist is part of the Parasite Eve identity. Because I think you can take all the other things we talked about, and if you did not feature a sexy female lead in Parasite Eve 4, people wouldn't admit it, but they would know, their brain would know that's not what makes it Parasite Eve. They want to have that crucial pillar there. Does anybody challenge me on that or want to counter that? Because I think I'm right on that.
Hope it helped, and I hope you have a
How much does this sell?
worldwide. Parasite Eve 2 has enjoyed the success of selling over 1.2 million copies.
1.2.
worldwide.
That's not bad.
Thank you for watching this recap. I hope it
For a
helped,
sequel,
and I hope
it's
you have a spooky but healthy
still
Halloween
doing
free of
over
related
1 million
content.
is still very good.
Subscribe for more recaps
The fact that
like
it did
this, share with
basically
someone
half
who
what the
could
first
use
one
it,
did, that's
and
not a
shout out
really
to the
big deal.
patrons and
A
channel
lot of new
members.
IPs get a
If
lot of
you would
hope
like to
behind
support
them.
the show yourself, please follow the links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next battlefield.
Alright, let's watch Parasite Eve. Not Parasite Eve 3,
Square Enix
the
and
third birthday.
Hexadrive in 2010 on the PlayStation Portable, the third birthday would be the third game in the Parasite Eve series designed as a third-person shooter. Directed by Hajime Tabata and written by Toshimitsu Takeuchi.
They should have
and Hirotomi
subscribed and hit that
Toriyama,
bell,
the game
everyone.
would take place 10 years after Parasite Eve 2, though it would not be designed to be a direct sequel to it. The story only gets larger.
Yeah, this one
from here,
was
so let's cut it down to size with the
phrased after
recapitulation.
10 years after
As the
Parasite
game
Eve 2.
begins, it's Christmas Eve
But
2012
quote-unquote
in
not
New York
based on
City,
it.
as a gigantic structure emerges in
You
Times
dislike
Square
the
and
enemies in
demolishes
time
the
travel and
area.
third birthday the most?
From
That's
them,
interesting,
smaller
because I
strange
actually
creatures
argue that
emerge around the
Twisted
city, causing massive
have
destruction
a
and
more
killing
interesting
hundreds.
design
With the
element
towers called the Babel,
than
deadly
all the
monsters
other
called
two. The other
Twisted now
two.
flood the streets,
Because here's the
killing anyone
thing,
that can
with the
catch fleeing
Twisted,
disaster.
all of
1 year
them
later, we
look
now
like
see
weird
Aya
alien
where the
creatures.
counter-twisted
None of them look
investigation
like
or
lazy
CTI's
bats and
Overdriver,
snakes,
and
like in the
she's
very
briefed
first
by
one.
Chief
You don't
Hyde
have
on a
lazy
mission to assist the
monsters.
military
You don't
in
have a
destroying the
generic
big
blob.
orb in the Babel in the
Even though you do
past in
fight a blob
order to
monster.
change the future. She is
All of
aided by
these,
veteran
including the
Agent
boss
Craig
monsters,
and
have
Dr.
very
Blank.
distinct
Hyde
art
reminds her that if her
styles.
soul dies in the
And they
dive,
do
she
not
dies
compromise
forever.
on that, too.
Using a
3
machine
actually has
alongside her
probably,
overdrive power
even
to
though it
save
may
her
not have the
soul
most
back in
memorable,
time,
because
Aya
everyone wants to talk
inhabits
about the
a
weird
soldier
design of the
outside
rat
during
and the
the
dog in the
sacrifice
very first
incident,
game,
as she is
but those are the only
reminded
2
that the orb
examples
is
of
the
that.
core of Babel.
Everything else looks super
Eliminating
generic.
Twisted
In
and her
Parasite
blade,
Eve,
Aya is able to
third
also
birthday,
dive into
all
other
these
soldiers
monsters
she
look
finds and
distinctly
maintain an advantage
alien.
with new hosts,
There are no
or dive
monsters
into
that look
damaged
like
monsters
lazy
to
monster
rupture
designs.
and
They
kill
all
them.
look bizarre and
Seeing the
alien.
power of the foes before her, Aya is pulled out of the dive just in time and wakes up from a familiar nightmare at 11.
So if anything, from creature design, third birthday is stronger than 1, I would argue.
Their boss and the FBI branch are gone, and cryptically mentions you don't need to have a past to have a future. As Aya dives into another mission during the disaster,
So the whole thing is that in this one, you can send your consciousness back in time, and then changing the events of the past, the future will immediately change to match it. So we have time travel, and we basically have body hopping. You're not actually changing, but you are having it to where, like, you are basically possessing other humans.
She's
in this
interrupted
one.
by Babel shifting, and a strange woman walks away, but beyond, Aya sees a body that reminds her of her dead coworker Gabrielle, and soon spots the ghost of the girl from her dreams and gives chase. Unfortunately, this leads to an encounter with a creature called a Reaper Aya cannot defeat and has no choice but to flee from. Defeating another colossal
The
twisted
gameplay
outside,
in
Aya
Third
confronts
Birthday
the
is very
survivor she
clearly
saw
a
before,
third-person
who was
shooter.
identified as Emily,
I'm not
and
gonna
approaches
lie,
Aya about her
even
fate.
though it is a competent
Aya
third-person
sees her as the
shooter,
girl
like if
from
you
her
just want to
dreams,
kill
as
time,
Emily
it
urges Aya to
flows and
remember where it
functions
all
pretty
started,
okay,
calling her
actually.
sis and mentioning
It's just not
something
terribly
called Time
interesting,
Zero.
because
Aya
it
tells her
plays
to
like
shoot, but Aya
every single
hesitates as
third-person
Emily turns
shooter. If
into
you
a
played a
powerful
single
giant
third-person
twisted.
shooter, you've played
During the
this.
battle, Aya dives into
The
Emily's
core
mind to
gunplay
see a girl
is
that looks
not
like her,
bad,
but
it's
wakes
also
up
not
back in her
great.
own time at 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve again.
Very average.
Immediately, Hyde now tells her to dive back 3 days as
They
Kratos
should
had
have done
killed
more
and
with
needs her
this
to prove
concept
that.
of the time
However,
traveling
Hunter,
altering
the
things,
boss
because
of
in this
CTI,
one,
whom Aya
they,
is
like
surprised to see
clearly
alive,
she knows she's jumping between two timelines and she knows something's up, but she's trying to figure things out because she has amnesia, which is again player proxy for we don't know what's going on because she doesn't know what's going on. And the story's being fed to us in very small snippets, quote unquote out of order. It's not really that much out of order, but they deliberately tell like conflicting events to create confusion. Because this is where she, brings in like people that she remembers as being dead in one timeline, being alive in another one.
Travels back 3 days to join the joint SWAT and Army operation to destroy the Babel in Spanish Harlem. Gabrielle in the past sees Aya and chooses to make a different choice, protecting her from being paralyzed by a powerful Twisted. Her sniper elite skills create a window long enough for Aya to leap into Gabrielle's body and borrow her to finish the job.
Keep in mind is also on the PSP, and the PSP is just stiff in general.
To clear the way ahead and dives into the Babel. Within, she finds herself before a Queen Twisted, manipulating other bodies floating around them, but upon destroying it, she succeeds in toppling the Babel and saving Cray in time. Aya calls in the success of her mission, but Hunter is there to say something's happened to Gabrielle, and he needs her to check it out. As it turns out, Hunter has sabotaged mission control of the present, gassing everyone to sleep, and reveals he has deliberately led Aya into a trap.
Well, and if the monsters are supposed to be effed up mutations of humans, shouldn't the monsters have been vaguely humanoid then? Maybe. They are literally twisted. So there's no disagreement there. They are absolutely twisted in form and design.
Wakes to discover Hunter's betrayal. He laughs as she begins to dissolve before she can stop him. Back in the past,
the fact that they actually look very insectile is interesting.
Memories rush into Aya as she recalls her sister Eve.
Because even though they are twisted, weird aliens, they have a kind of very insectile look to them.
Aya has no memory of. Eve then disappears as Kyle explains Eve is dead and her soul wanders through the gaps of time.
I like Kyle's design, but Kyle's purpose here serves no purpose.
Mentioning he'll meet her at the Babel in the Red Fog. Waking up again at 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Aya sees this is the timeline where Hunter is dead and the FBI is gone, but Cray is alive. Unsure of things, Aya requests for information on Kyle and Eve to Hyde, as Hyde knows
people I feel really over magnified the whole battle damage thing, because first off, you do have a health bar. Your health bar is the health bar of whatever person you're possessing at the time, and it's very clearly there. If they did not have a health bar, and because you see right there like a giant green bar at the end, it says life, you clearly have a health bar. But the more damage you take, the more your clothes get damaged. But when you heal up, your clothes also repair itself. Is it silly? Sure. But if to me, they should have committed and just taken out the life bar and just used visual body damage. If you're going to do one or the other.
Though from Command's perspective, they don't see anything and speculate Aya is.
So here we have multiverse right here. And we have people that are just okay with the concept of multiverse.
Who pulls a gun on her and reveals himself to really be Cray and looks.
This betrayal has no impact because it is introduced as soon as it's resolved.
Including the real Captain Russo as a means to protect his daughter and allows himself to be.
It's also dumb because you don't fight him.
Diving in after him, because
as soon as she goes in, he's like, "Oh, by the way, I'm actually a ghost of my past, and I feel bad for my dead daughter that I only just now mentioned, and I'm disappearing now. So goodbye."
And is relieved to finally join her.
I never like it when stories introduce a problem as soon as they end. Also, Blank looks like he's like a teenager. He has such a baby face.
February 15, 2014, and an assault on
I don't like this time jump either because
nuclear option is exercised.
Right here,
meeting up with her old scientist friend Maida, Aya shows she is not able to use her overdrive technique to jump into the past on her own.
The rewrite on Maida was dumb.
But reflecting how CTI and
but like, see, Blank's dead, everything's destroyed. We don't see that. I never like it when storytell is just show don't tell is a very effective, very true storytelling device. Like, show don't tell.
Their efforts do not succeed in destroying the Babel, and so
the gameplay variety was actually kind of cool. Like the vehicle levels, I'm not gonna lie, were actually kind of fun. The couple times you did it, and the whole idea that NPCs are your lives was actually a very cool gameplay mechanic. That was creative and different, and to me that played into the overall theme of you evolving your power, which is, remember, Eve's ability was not just mitochondrial NMC nonsense. What they did is they evolved her and deliberately programmed her to be able to control other monsters, and in this case other humans as well. Her evolved power is basically controlling other organisms, and so using that as the gameplay mechanic I think was a good evolution of Eve's powers. It made sense. That was a good logical evolution, is being able to overdive into other monsters and other people.
Converging around the nuclear explosion, the Babels surround and smother it, completely
Part of the show
absorbing
don't tell maybe in the
detonation and
PSP?
growing
No,
into a
that's bad
stronger new
storytelling. You
Grand Babel.
absolutely could show. You're
Before
telling me
it,
with
Hyde
all the
now
emphasis
mentions
they
the
put on
doors to Zero
cinematics, they
have
couldn't have
opened
shown what
before
was going
stepping
on?
in,
No
and at the same
bullshit.
time,
They
Maya
could have
discovers the
shown
Babel is
rather than
actually a
told.
giant overdrive
They chose
system.
to make that
In
decision.
addition, he shares the new powerful, intelligent, and human-like life forms, dubbing them the High Ones, are now trying to take the Grand Babel from the Twisted. They spot Hyde from a satellite image, and following him in with what troops remain, Maida guides her to where there is a large energy signature called the Doors of Time, where Twisted are entering the past.
Oh, we
and
got
she
another
can use
bot.
it to
Man, this is
overdrive as well.
aggressive.
He suspects Hyde is also using it to travel back in time several years ago too, and as Aya catches up, Hyde is indeed there, lamenting how he has been trapped in the Ring of Time, destroying Twisted sent from the future. Even when he falls, he just wakes up in the church on a snowy day again, and the cycle repeats itself. He's not at all too surprised to find Aya confronting him about pitting her against the High Ones so far, and Hyde explains in this war against the Twisted, every time one of them dies, the tower grows stronger. In fact, he took advantage of that fact to form Grand Babel and unlock the doors to
Because look at
Zero,
those boss
revealing
creature
he also
designs.
has
Those are
overlap powers
very
like her,
distinct boss
because
creature
he's actually
designs.
a High One as well.
Those are way more interesting
Ascending
than the
into
stuff that
his
we
twisted form,
observed
Aya battles
otherwise.
Hyde and forces a dive into him where she sees during the attack on her wedding day, Aya was the one to shoot Eve during those events. Hyde explains she did so to stop
And
the
here's
awakening
where
of
Hyde
Eve,
kind of
the
explains
mother,
things,
as
saying that,
all the
look,
High
when you jumped in
Ones
the
were
past
created
and when you
moment
left your
Eve
body,
awakened,
your dead
and they
body
each inherited her
basically
memories.
separated and parts of
Hyde,
you went
Cray,
to us.
Emily, and
So
Gabrielle were all there
all
that
three of
fateful
them, which
day,
by the way,
and Aya
Gabrielle's
suggests
completely
overdiving
useless
into the
character.
past to fix things.
All of them
Hyde
gained
counters
new
that
abilities
overdiving is
from
something
and basically
others can do
evolved
besides
as
Aya,
humans.
and
Eve
takes her
evolved
Eve
them as
instead.
humans. And then
Back
Hyde
before
wants
the
to go
Queen,
around
Aya
and
finds
say,
it as a large
hey,
twisted she's battled with before, and upon diving into it, catches up to
when
Hyde's
you
Rockefeller
did this, you
Center,
also
who wonders
created the
which of them will
Twisted.
reach Zero
Aya created the
first.
Twisted,
Pitting
basically,
their
when she was
individual
scattered
overdrive
across
abilities
time.
against each other,
I'm not
Aya is
saying that that
encouraged by
makes
her
any
friends and
sense,
loved
but
ones
I am
to
saying that's what
lend
they're
their
doing.
power and bodies
And
to
another
her
one.
in order to edge out a win
The
against
AIs
the
are
Chief.
evolving.
As Hyde dissolves, he claims Aya cannot go against time and will be forced to commit another sin against her wishes as Time Zero reveals itself to her. Traveling back to Christmas Eve 2010, Aya witnesses the events of her wedding to Kyle.
This
from
part
the
I think was
perspective
also
of
kind of
Eve,
dumb.
right when a military group bursts in to gun
So
down
I really
Aya,
wish they kind of
Kyle,
did
and
delve.
the
It's like
priest.
instead of having
The
the
overnight
military
power
police
awakening
come in
both
and gun
Aya
them
and
down,
Eve is
which I
desperate to save Aya, and she
suspect,
finds
I
herself
don't like,
diving into Aya's
speculation,
body
but
and
I
killing all of her
suspect
attackers, but
Hyde
has no
set up
memory of
that, not
herself
Hyde.
anymore. As he stated before, Hyde is returned to the church upon his
Their
death
other
and
boss,
greets
the one that
her,
wanted to
as
be in the
Eve is
FBI,
informed
who never
Time Zero is
trusted
claiming
Aya.
that she
I
dove
believe
into Aya's
he
body
set up
and
that
lost her
hit because
memory,
he
and
always, and he
overdived before
correctly
the
said,
souls
you're no
collide.
different than those
He
monsters,
also adds
and
in doing so,
he's right
Aya's soul
because
was
the monsters
destroyed,
directly
and though
come
she
from
refuses
her.
to believe this, Eve recalls that Aya never shot her after all, and Hyde confirms this. He continues that when Aya's soul was
See, because
shattered
Hyde
by
basically
Eve,
wants
her
to,
fragments
now that
scattered
he
across
has a
time and
taste of
space
higher
became reborn
evolution,
as the Twisted. At the same time, Eve's discarded body deteriorated and created life forms with her memories, the High Ones.
and then he wants to
Aya's
evolve
friends at
other
the wedding
people
then turned into
similarly.
monsters she had to later kill. As they stand at the beginning of the cycle,
But to
again,
say what
he
you were
assures
saying
her this
earlier,
time it will
Lynn,
not
if they're being
repeat,
evolved
as
humans,
this
why
time
don't they
he
look
is
more
back in her
human-like?
own
Well, who's to
body,
say that the
taking off her
evolution
protection
of
to let
humans
him
needs to
overdrive
necessarily
into
look
her
human-like?
and create a new,
Remember, the
even
monsters only
stronger
look
species
human-like
that
in
will destroy
Parasite
the
Eve
Twisted
2
and leave
because they
humanity
were
behind.
mutated
She refuses to
clones.
allow it, but Hyde forces
Not
it to be
necessarily
her
an
anyway,
entirely new
just in time he is
species,
shot down
because
by Aya,
he's
recovering
talking
from
about
her own
creating an
gunshot
entirely new
wounds, as her soul
species,
has
and that's
not
what
left
happened.
yet.
When they
She
fused
finishes off
and
Hyde, but
people
then
became
turns to Eve,
twisted, it
handing
became
her
an
her
entirely
gun
new
and
thing.
telling her
This is the
cycle
only
still
time you
not been
see
stopped,
Aya.
and tells her where to aim
She's
if she will
shot, but
kill
she
her
regens
to
thanks
prevent
to
the
her
creation of
powers,
the
and she
Twisted.
guns down the person who
Eve
gunned
is
her down
reluctant to do
first.
so, always
That's the
admiring
only
Aya,
time
but
you see
Aya
Aya.
regrets not being able to exchange vows with Kyle.
This part
The
is
two hug each other as their overlap
whatever.
powers awaken, and as Eve and Aya swap souls between their bodies, Eve within Aya shoots Aya within Eve.
And they have to kill
as
her.
Aya claims
So
she
there you
won't
go. There's
disappear.
that.
Mourning the loss of Aya, Eve now hears the voice of Kyle, who
Gene,
tells
thanks
her
for
he
jumping in.
believes
I
his
appreciate
and
you coming
Aya's
in.
love surpasses death and time,
I
and one day
can't do
they
any
will
more
meet
work on
again, as
Parasite
he
Eve because
wakes
that
up and
series is
wishes her
dead.
Merry
That's why we're
Christmas.
talking about it. But at the same
With a
time,
flash of light,
appreciate
time
you
resets
looking
and
forward
changes
to the
into a
next
new
thing.
course, as the voice of Aya now speaks to Eve,
The
telling
fact
her to
that
smile and
all
look
this
up
went
at the
down
future,
and then
as
Kyle
she
just
is watching
wakes
over her
up.
in
He's
this
like, "Oh,
timeline
hey,
where Eve's
Merry
body
Christmas,"
doesn't
and he's like,
exist
you were just
As the
shot
game ends,
down,
Eve stands in for
and you're
Aya
just
on her
getting
intended
up.
wedding day,
Excuse
when Kyle
me.
catches the deception, smirking and telling Eve she doesn't have to
And then
pretend,
also he just
He then
knows.
steps
He's like,
away,
he just
telling her to
senses
live
that,
her
hey, I
own
know
life
that you're
as
actually
he and
the
I will
clone of the
watch
woman
over
I
her.
love and whatever.
Turning, he declares he's now
Get
going
out of
to
here,
go on a
kid.
journey to find eternity, but pauses to wish her a happy birthday.
It's like he can
Later,
somehow
Eve is
remember the
walking
other
down a stony
timeline.
street as an oddly
And then we have
familiar
this, the
woman walks
teaser
past her
ending
to wish her
where
a happy 4th birthday. But quickly
probably
turning, Eve
Aya
sees
says
no one is
goodbye to
there.
probably Eve, who
The
also
3rd
says she's
birthday
going to
was enjoy the
monitor her from
success
like
of
the
selling over
timeline, so it sets up that
520,000
possibility
copies
there could be another
worldwide.
game.
This is a pretty controversial
How
game
much
to
did it
many,
sell?
but
Let's
let me
see.
know what you think in the comments. The Third Birthday has enjoyed the success of selling over 520,000 copies.
520,000. So it did half of what 2 did. So each installment's basically not as much as it otherwise was. Okay. So that's the end of the watch along, which is now we're going into the discussion portion. You didn't think 3 sell as much because the main character was changed? People didn't know the main character was changed. To this day, people don't know that that's not Eve. There are people that are going around saying, "Oh, they did such a terrible job of portraying Aya. Wow, it's almost like she's not Aya." Amazing. Maybe the reason why the lady who you're playing as doesn't seem like Aya is because she's not Aya. Who would have thought? I think it's because of the PSP. I think that's more the contributing factor. I think the fact that it wasn't called Parasite Eve, it was called Third Birthday, and people had to be told it was related to Parasite Eve, and it came out on the PSP. I think those two are detractors for sales on it. And same thing, early on, it's been a while. Like this came out 10 years after Parasite Eve 2. In that 10 years, you know, survival horror games didn't really evolve that much. It was mostly Resident Evil and everyone else. And so you're going to try to reintroduce a character. They basically tried to reintroduce Eve, but they try to do it while maintaining the illusion of Aya. That's supposed to be the big twist in the end, no pun intended, with all the twisted stuff. And, it just didn't stick with audiences. Gameplay wise, it was okay. It really wasn't bad. It was different, but all three of them are different. And we'll talk about that. Man, I'm getting hit by the bots. I swear my channel's actually growing now. I need to see if there is a function in YouTube that does that. Yeah, please keep reporting them because they're useless. The marketing for Third Birthday was also non-existent for sure. Like Square Enix not promoting games that they claim they want to succeed, not a surprise. I know all these bots are interested in Aya now. But as far as I can tell, here's what I feel melded together if we're to try to create a Parasite Eve identity for this series. One is going to be the story, of course, which I think theming ties into that as well. Not just how well the story was told, but theming for that story is a portion of it as well. Next, you have combat. All of them are overtly action games. Anybody who says the first or second game are survival horror games, you are wrong. You are factually wrong. Those games absolutely focus on you gunning down literally everything you cross. It's not about you avoiding hazards or having limited resources to work with or being challenged. No, you are expected to gun down everything and kill everything in your path. That is an action game. That is not survival. That is you straight up killing everything in your way. There's a difference. Like if you want to go survival, then that is more Silent Hill or Resident Evil, the older ones, because on those you literally are not going to be expected to kill everything. They are specifically not giving you the resource to even succeed in that endeavor, and in some cases they even punish you for it for trying. Like that's not the case. Parasite Eve is straight up an action game. It's an action game where you fight monsters and freakos. You even get points for killing stuff. Exactly. Like they have modes directly benefiting you killing things better and faster. Like that's literally the game mode. So people peg this wrong right from the beginning, right from the outstart. It's an action horror game. That's what this is. So get that clear. Second, in the two Parasite Eve games, you play as Aya, and Third Birthday, you play as Eve. So complaining that Aya is not in the third game is not part of the overall identity, even though Eve is a clone of Aya. And therefore, they can do the misdirection easier, which I give them credit for trying to do a twist. Credit where credit's due. Because here's how I know that twist was successful. It has been 20 years, and people still haven't figured out that twist. Actually, it hasn't been 20 years, it's been 10 years. This was 2012, right? Yeah, 2012, right? When was this game?
Worldwide. This is a pretty alike. Thanks for watching.
2010. So yeah, it's been a dozen years. A dozen years and people still haven't figured out that the twist. Come on now. This is where misinformation on the internet is a problem.
See you on the next battle.
The two, like the additional footage at the bottom here where it says daily motion, I had to get that for the two bonus scenes back here because those are actually deleted off YouTube. Same thing for the shower scene. The shower scene is blocked on YouTube. If you have any shower scene in there, it's blocked. They actually flag your video. They take it off, so I had to go to an outside website to get it. That must be what's attracting all these bots. Speaking of biohazards, Jesus. But let's go to the next part. So there's only 3 things here. And I was taking notes. And I wrote theme down here, but I could take that off. Because maybe story and theme aren't necessarily connected. I feel the way that a story can include the theme is separate from the strength of the theme itself. But characters, including Aya, Eve, or any supporting cast, is important. Creatures is very important here, as well as fighting said creatures and the story. I feel that if you're gonna make an IP identity on this, and wasn't Third Birthday originally marketed as a phone game? I think it was. I believe that's true. By the way, the reason I had to use Resident Evil here as a placeholder for Third Birthday is because there is no tier maker preset for Parasite Eve. So I went to like all horror games and this came up, even though this is horribly outdated. And there's stuff on here that aren't really horror games. They have some stuff on here that I also have never heard of. Like they have stuff that's horrible in it. Like I wouldn't call Virtue's Last Reward a horror game. That's not a horror game. Alice is not a horror game. Castlevanias, these are not horror games. Yeah, you fight monsters, but horror is not what you're going up. These are monster games. Symphony Night is a horribly overrated game, but I wouldn't say it's a horror game. Whoever made this list is terrible. Luigi's Mansion, get the fuck out of here, Jesus Christ. I haven't even heard of some of these things. This is a joke. Yakuza Dead Souls is just a fun game. It's just there to be a joke. This is literally a bad game. Stubbs the Zombie, come on. Prey doesn't even have horror elements in it. You fight aliens. Gears of War? Are you joking me? Gears of War on a best horror games list? Oh my god. This list sucks. This is a stupid list. Prey 1 is total body horror? I wouldn't go that. No, it's not. It is not body horror. Just because there's gore in a game doesn't make it body horror. Some of these games didn't even come out in America. This was Fatal Frame 4 or 5. And they recently ported that. Yeah, Fatal Frame 4 and 5. I actually have Cold Fear. That's a straight up Resident Evil 4 clone. They put Resident Evil Gaiden on there. Jesus Christ. And Deadly Silence, all Deadly Silence is the DS port of Resident Evil 1. And it had an extra mode where you can be first person mode. That's the only difference. Jesus Christ. This is such a terrible list. It doesn't even have all the Resident Evils on it. It actually doesn't even have all the Silent Hills on it. Oh my god, you put Umbrella Corps in here? Looking at how terrible this list is almost more interesting than looking at Parasite Eve. Some of these I haven't heard of though. Michigan Report from Hell? I'm almost curious. They literally make monsters out of people? No, they don't. They don't make monsters out of people in Gears. Like that's an actual separate race. Oh, and Prey 1. I was about to say, it's like, what on earth are you talking about? Because in Prey 1, you're like a Native American who uses spirit powers. Fear, by the way, in my opinion, is not a horror game. It is the only level in Fear. Because I remember Fear was so hyped up when it first came out. I had a friend that swore by Fear. And when I finally played Fear, literally all it was a generic first person shooter. People wanted to talk about how advanced the AI is. I don't think that's really true. But what happens is that you play as a shooter, and occasionally at the very end of like every other level, you would have ooh spooky girl with long hair coming towards you. Ooh, the hallway's full of blood. They do it twice. At no point did they actually merge the concept of action and horror. It literally was any time that was not the very finale of that level, it was just a generic regular first person shooter. And then the exception was the final level. The final level actually merged like visual horror with the gunplay that you're doing. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. I wish the entire game was this. I felt Fear was so overhyped. I've never even heard of Home. This person like didn't even bother playing it. It's still sealed. Look at this. Why is it on this list? The Last of Us. Oh my god. Like, yeah, there's horror things in there, but no. Wow, Illbleed. That's a callback right there. I don't know if you would call like Metro is a very survival game. All the Metro games are very survival game, and there are mutants in there that can be creatures. But horror, I don't think horror is like what they're explicitly going for. I also never read the Metro books. Murdered is literally just a murder mystery, and you play as a ghost. Yeah, sometimes you have to exercise spooky ghosts, but it's not really a horror game. It's more about the actual mystery. It's a mystery game. It's LA Noire if you were a ghost. Aren't the Saw games puzzle games? Isn't Shadow Man just an action game? I know Shadows of the Damned is definitely just an action game. I've seen this, I've never played. Singularity is not a horror game. Get out of here. Sinking City is not a horror game. Get out of here. Sinking City is about, like, metaphorically you being in, like, depression. Fear is not generic. Defend Fear then, Franz. Defend Fear as not being a generic shooter. Because I'll tell you what, nobody remembers Fear in this day and age. Nobody talks about it because it was generic. It had slightly interesting AI at the time that was quickly overshadowed by its contemporaries. Fear was left behind in the dust and produced two very mediocre sequels. Fear itself for the gunplay was a generic shooter. I challenge you to defend that. Wolfenstein's also not really a horror game. Like you shoot Nazis. Sometimes those Nazis are undead because of weird experiments, but they're Nazis. Anyway, this list is stupid. Well, what is this? See, Escape from Bug Island on the Wii? Give me a effing break. Jesus Christ. No one talks about Fear because everything after one didn't. No, no, no. No one talks about Fear not because of its legacy. That didn't help, but no one talks about Fear because Fear wasn't worth remembering. Wolfenstein's a Doom clone? Well, technically, they're made by the same person. So I don't know. I don't know how much you can really say that. A Dino Crisis. If there's any series Capcom should bring back with the Resident Evil engine, with the RE engine, it's Dino Crisis. Dino Crisis. Like, no, they're making that exoprimal thing, which is Anthem, but with dinosaurs. But it's like we are this close to having Dino Crisis. This close to having Dino Crisis. And they chose to make Exoprimal instead. Doom is actually a Wolfenstein clone? That is correct. Wolfenstein did come out first. But again, they're made by the same person, so really doesn't matter. I like how this isn't Mercenaries 3D is not even a game. It's just, well, it is a game. Take that back. It is not a campaign. It is just online multiplayer. It is just an online multiplayer game. That is all it is. They literally just made the Mercenaries mode that people like. I never liked Mercenaries, but I respect that people do. This is not for me. This game isn't even canon. Get out of here. Gun Survivor 2, Code Veronica. That's not even canon. This game doesn't even exist. They have a game that doesn't exist on here in the best games that ever made. Includes demo. There was only a demo. That's ridiculous. Whoever made this is a troll insert. This is such a troll. This list is so bad. Oh my god. This list is so trash. Actually, I have this game, Extermination. I've never heard of Glass Rose, but this conviction on this guy's face. Gregory Horror Show literally looks like a meme. This literally looks like some weird European horror. Like, oh, it's probably like dark comedy in here, but I would challenge if it's horror. And they got anime visual novels where, anime girls die horrible deaths. Tecmo's Deception. I'm almost curious to actually look up some of these. Dark Delusion. Like, I haven't heard of some of these for sure. Ghost Vibration. That sounds suggestive right there. Juggernaut. I think I've seen Lifeline. Martian Goth Unification. I've never heard of this. Monster House is not even a horror game. It's literally a movie-based game. Man, Monster House is that old that it was on the PS2? That's crazy. There's also some games on here that I'm surprised are not on this list. Zero Story, never heard of that. All the 999 games they're escape room games. They're not. Among the Sleep is not horror. Like it you play as a baby who's having like a nightmare, so I get that it can conceptually be perceived as horror, but it's really not. Plague Tale's too cool to be on this list. Back in 1995, I've never heard of. Even on the Vita, where like there's like literally 20 games that came out, I've never heard of this game. Anyway, this list is stupid. So I have Resident Evil stepping in for third birthday. So the first four categories, I'm definitely committed on: story, combat, creatures, and characters. Theme, I that's the best I can come up with for like what really ties Parasite Eve as an IP identity. As if you look at something and you identify it as this is going to be Parasite Eve. Because it's okay that it's very similar to Resident Evil. It's always been that case. The people comparing the two series overall are not wrong. They're wrong in specific examples, but they're not wrong overall. Like, it's steeped in pseudoscience, you have mad science basically creating problems. You have creatures resulting from human greed. There's a moral in there somewhere. So, I get that. Saw as horror puzzle, I guess. I mean, just because people like, I don't know. I feel like the term horror is always been a blanket term, but it's being used a little too generously here. Like, boo, it's a ghost for Luigi's Mansion. Really? You're calling that horror? Like, it's cartoon level stuff. It's like having a spooky, Halloween ghost. Like, yes, it's a ghost, and it's a satire of a horror thing, and like yes, Luigi is scared, but like us as the player, we're not. Like, ugh, whatever, whatever. We're not arguing this. Corpse Party is 100% horror. Why would you suggest it isn't? I don't think I commented on Corpse Party. I mean, if I did, I don't even know what's Corpse Party. I don't. I've heard of Corpse Party. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. But it really does look like anime girls getting killed. Anyway, I'm gonna kind of go with this to really see like because I really do feel like these five pillars support the concept of Parasite Eve, or at least all three games share these comparable pillars. I think anything else is just I don't know, useless evidence. What do you guys think? Do you think there's anything else that's really supporting the Parasite Eve series outside of these five major pillars? I think I'm going to stick with the five pillar system too, because I think if you go a little less, you're not scrutinizing enough, and if you go too much on that, you're over scrutinizing it to the point where you're creating just unrelatable examples. Because Parasite Eve is an interesting specimen to look at because all three games do different things, but they're still directly comparable. Gene, the transformations. What do you mean the transformations? Are you talking about people turning into monsters? I'm lumping that into creatures. Because in each of the games, you see people turn into monsters, and you obviously have to fight said monsters. And the commentary on the monsters themselves is something I think we can discuss, even if we can discuss it in a very subjective way. All this is subjective, obviously, but it seems like nobody really has any suggestions beyond this. So I think we're just gonna go ahead and just get started. I'm gonna drink some water. Wow, we're almost at the 2 hour mark. Pretty impressive. Like seeing the rat transform in the beginning of one. See, everybody keeps using that example. That is such an overused example, especially since that one rat transformation, A, other than like the dog or like the people melting in the stadium, like that's not even the most impressive one. And B, like people keep using that just like they keep using the dog example in Resident Evil because I keep feeling that people just see that beginning part of the game and then bounce for the rest of the story, and so they don't use the other examples. Like I have a sneaking suspicion the reason why people don't know that Aya is not Aya in Third Birthday is because they never played Parasite Eve 2 to realize Eve even existed, and that's why they got fooled. I don't know. It's something you don't see a lot of in the original Resident Evils. What, people getting turned into monsters? No, I mean you wouldn't because in the early Resident Evils, actually almost all the Resident Evils, you are not there on site while the disaster is starting. You're there on site after like the incident already occurred. And also for like a lot of the big bosses, like especially the tyrants, you do see the transformations. You see people get turned into horrible monsters. And a lot of the tyrant transformations are also really impressive. But you're not usually there to see the infection happen. That's usually not there. That's not something you didn't see in Resident Evil. I counter that saying because Parasite Eve came out after Resident Evil 2, and the William Birkin transformation over the entire course of Resident Evil 2 is much more grotesque and dramatic than anything in Parasite Eve. Birkin was the only original trilogy monster you see transformed? Really? I raise you Mr. X. I raise you crimson heads. But either way, the whole point is that you arrive to see this stuff already happen, while in Parasite Eve, the crisis is starting right in front of you. They take place during different things. But this isn't a Resident Evil versus Parasite Eve comparison. History has shown that Resident Evil, Parasite Eve's dead, Resident Evil's not. Like, there's not much to discuss beyond that point. This is Parasite Eve against other Parasite Eves. We're not talking about other series because those don't matter. The whole point of a tier list is to talk about the relativity of the games to each other. And in terms of that story, I'm still going to give 1 point off for Parasite Eve 1, but I would still say Parasite Eve 1 is still better told than 3. But I would say story Parasite Eve 2 is better told than 1. And the reason I put that out there is because the motivations, the tie into Aya, the rationale for the people using it, the execution that they have, all that's tied together smoother in Parasite Eve 2 than Parasite Eve 1. In Parasite Eve 1, you consistently have the Parasite Eve itself as the main antagonist, but her whole goal is to just keep evolving and gaining more power, even though it's also the same thing with you as Aya. But it's also constrained because of how much it's trying to tie into the original story. They artificially limited themselves. They had some creative liberty, but it really wasn't realized all that much, especially since towards the end, it just became about Eve evolving into one monster, into another monster, into another monster. But that was not fundamentally any different. Like the end goal of Parasite Eve, with the whole thing like, mitochondria are really going to be like the mainstays here. I'm going to command all this. We actually control humanity. It was there. It was very guide. It wasn't focused. Eve itself was not a focused entity. There was no real endgame for Eve. Eve was just like a movie monster, just there to be a terror and to be put down. Meanwhile, Parasite Eve 2, you had a couple of interested parties. You had the um you had the storytelling from Aya's perspective, coping with her growing powers and what that meant for her. You had the United States interest in that. You had, of course, the organization's interest on that. You had a lot of interested parties who were written and their individual motivations coming together at a head. Some people working together, some people working against each other. You had the internal conflicts. There was a much better told, much more enriching story in 2 versus 1. The biggest week in Parasite 2 was that bullshit romance that they try to make us buy between her and Kyle. That was nonsense. And third birthday, when you tell stories out of order, you are taking a big risk. You are always taking a big risk when you have storytelling that's broken up on purpose. And you are really hoping that by the end of the story, people have paid attention to the details, the puzzle pieces, that you get that full picture at the end. History has shown us that people did not get that story at the end. People do not understand the story of Third Birthday that well. And when you throw in the weird time travel thing, if you're gonna throw in that version of time travel, you really should have stuck to your guns. And they didn't stick to their guns on it. The motivations of some of the characters were understandable. Hyde basically got Eve's powers, became a high one, and wanted to create a new race of things because the race that was created Aya from Aya's spirit being scattered across time was the Twisted. And he's like, yo, I can make a new species and I'll be in charge of that species. And not only can we kill the Twisted, which was Aya's subspecies, I can just make my new one and we'll get rid of humans and I will be the evolution. I will be the blueprint for the new race that dominates the world. And I have infinite continues because every time I die, I restart in time as long as this loop keeps continuing. That could have been interesting, but it ultimately wasn't. Because that was the entire plot line of it, was really hide behind the scenes, attempting to orchestrate Eve into canceling the time loop that Aya created and going into the time loop that Hyde now controls. Eve was always being played. Eve was not necessarily direct. Like Eve was introduced as amnesia, which was, by the way, a very weak storytelling device to go with. Amnesia storytelling is almost always a very weak foot to start on because again, oh, when your spirit fused into Aya's body, you magically lost all your memories. Well, why? I already know this is weird sci-fi pseudo magic nonsense, but that just seems so out of left field to just be like, oh, I lost my memories, and I guess I think that I'm Aya now, even though literally everybody around you know that's not true. And then Kyle just being such an insert there. He's just there to be like blah blah blah. You need to seek Eve, and then I faked my death. That was so dumb. Because literally, when Aya makes the choice, I'm like, oh man, I really wish I could marry Kyle. Kyle's over there who's alive. He's just pretending to be dead. And then as soon as Aya's shot, he wakes up. He's like, well, it's a good thing I'm alive now. How? Aya surviving gunshots makes sense. She has self regenerative abilities. We've already established that across 2 games. What the F is Kyle's deal? Dude gets gunned down and wakes up like it's nothing. That was, when I saw them, like, this is stupid. That is so dumb. And he just like casually wakes up and doesn't even regret the fact that Aya's dead. Aya mourns Kyle. Kyle does not mourn Aya. He claims he does, but he really kind of doesn't. He's like, I guess I'll go chase my eternity now. And he goes off with a smile. Kyle is such a useless character in both Parasite Eve 2 and Third Birthday. But I would say that for this one, for story, Parasite Eve 2, then 1, then 3. So write that down, chat, because we're going to total up these totals in just a bit. This one is very easy to compare. All 3 of these games are action horror games. Lynn, the story order is 2, then 1, then 3. So for combat, I'm going to straight up say it. Combat in 1 is straight up the last place. That system was not a good system. That system is not used again except for one other Squaresoft game, and then they dump it because it is not an effective system. It does not help either the action or even the cheap attempt at being quote unquote strategic turn based aspect of it. It does not benefit either of those environments. It was something new, it was experimental, it did not work well. That combat in Parasite Eve 1 is absolutely the worst of the 3 games. If anybody in chat wants to present a counter to that, you're more than welcome to, but history shows that system is dead. Nobody misses it. Nobody asks for it. Nobody compliments Parasite Eve 1 on its combat. Whenever you hear people talk nostalgically about Parasite Eve 1, they talk about the story, the characters, the creatures. You don't hear people praising this game for its combat. That much is true. And, the shying away of, oh well, it's not about combat, bullshit. Though all 3 games are about combat. It's a game that's about combat that did not have a good combat system. That's the beginning and end of it. Parasite Eve straight up took from RE2, but that's not bad because it was simple and it was functional. At no point in Parasite Eve 2, except for probably the final boss, did I really feel that you were fighting the controls or the artificial limitations of the combat. Say what you will about predetermined camera angles, even though that's technically in 1 as well. The mobility in 2, the gunplay, the auto targeting system, it was much more intuitive because we were already familiar with it by its much more popular competitor. So people more easily grasped Parasite Eve 2 when it came to exploration, combat, gunplay, um, power usage. They removed a lot of the weird uh, original stuff they wanted to go with. I don't think anybody missed it. And yes, it led to direct comparisons to RE2, but that's not a bad thing because RE2 is only one of the most successful horror games of all time. That's not a bad thing to be compared to. The environments also reflected that as well. The environments in one were much simpler. All the boss arenas were giant empty rooms. Uh, for the most part, the creatures you were fighting against just required you to quickly sidestep whatever AoE attack they had because it was very primitive and simple, and just fire occasionally whenever you had enough energy on your recharge meter or bullets that you want to put in. Oh, we got that bot again. I wonder if I'm saying something that triggers it. That being said, Parasite Eve's 2 combat is also dropped. And it's one that's dropped not only from the series, but it's dropped from general gameplay in general as just combat systems move on. It was one of those, it seemed right at the time, but I almost feel like the inspiration for Parasite Eve was to be like Resident Evil. Because, like, if we're going to be an action combat game, what if we're like Resident Evil but more combat y? Which, ironically, Resident Evil started doing starting in Resident Evil 3 anyway. Resident Evil 3 was the beginning of the game being, of the series being more action oriented, more than survival. People blame 4, it's really 3. Uh, but I will still place it above 1. Easy. The question is, 3's gunplay is functionally better than the other two, by virtue of it being your run of the mill standard third person shooter, run and gun shooter, cover based shooter. I don't like the cover system that they use, by the way. It's, first of all, the cover is destructible in this game, if I remember correctly. And two, it has that auto lock function. So if you kind of like go next to cover and push against cover, then she'll go into cover, but there's not actually a prompt to it. It's not inherently designed as a command. You can't just take cover because you feel like it or duck or something like that. You have to push into cover and the context will let you be in cover. Cover also doesn't matter for a lot of the enemies in this game. Like the main function of you transporting across people is the main crux, and that's an important part as well. Franz, I don't know if it's fair to compare them on gameplay because they are fairly different. No, actually, you answer your own question. You can compare them because they are so different. Because what we're doing is we're not directly comparing if one system is better than another. We're talking about how well that system supported the game itself. How well was that system implemented in that game? In that layer of nuance, in that context, they are directly comparable. Because in terms of, like, systems, like a third person system versus the third person auto aim system, uh, first off, those are directly comparable because both those systems are just absolutely better than the nonsense Parasite Eve 1 did. But the function of Parasite Eve Third Birthday did weave well with the overall concept of Eve having to jump into bodies. Um, it created an interesting combat dynamic because you don't have health by yourself. You are not playing as Eve. You are playing as a body you take possession of, and that body has its own health bar. So every NPC is your own moving health bar, and you can lose them. And if you're not taking control of them, then they are off doing their own little AI things. And sometimes they may die just due to the enemy getting too aggro on them, or maybe not. But I feel it works with the theme of the system as well. Overdive itself was a kind of cool concept where I can go inside the creature when it's weak and almost like a finisher rupture for massive damage. It became like a stagger condition goal. It added a layer of tactic to the combat more so than cover, And when you take into account you had that I don't remember what it's called, but it's got focus fire ability, where any of the living NPCs, you can tell them to focus fire at a creature to increase the susceptibility for you to overdive in it. From a combat engagement point of view, there's a lot more going on in Third Birthday. If you take that element out, it's just another third person shooter, and that makes it very generic. In terms of genericness, one is the least generic. It is so bizarre. It is out there, but it needs to stay out there. And then even this is not very common, but this one would be the most redundant. But for the purpose of serving the actual moment to moment gameplay, this one serves more, ties more to the story and the theme and the character than this. Um, this one, you're still using your menu based powers, and Aya it has a whole bucket full of guns and powers. This actually has a lot of guns in it too, but whatever. Generic third person shooter. Does Third Birthday still have powers? Yes. So Eve does not have the allotment of powers that Aya does. Eve has a lot fewer powers, and they also have like either conditions to activate them or cooldowns. Like there's this one overdive. They're all based on overdive. Overdive is like the new awakened ability Eve has when she's so traumatized by the disruption of the wedding. She awakens these new powers because that's again what the whole Eve concept is. In crisis, you evolve to create a solution that will fix that problem. That's kind of the theme in Parasite Eve is evolution. And in Third Birthday, Eve evolves her power out of the distress of seeing of everyone getting gunned down. And so in that distress she creates overdrive, and in that overdrive there's a couple different things you can do. And not just possess other people, but she can also have like bullet time and stuff like that. She can just artificially increase things. I don't think she can heal. I don't think that's a power. She doesn't shoot fireballs. Uh like Aya does. She doesn't have that, which I always thought was pretty silly, but it is what it is. Apparently, pyrokinesis is a mitochondria power. But yes, Eve has her own set of powers in Third Birthday. And I think the limited assortment of powers, it less being a modern magic system, because that's kind of what they did in Parasite Eve 2 and 1, is that it's basically modern day magic. It's how they wrote off the mitochondria. It's just modern day magic. And in 3, they kind of tone that down to being tools. So I would argue in terms of combat, I think Third Birthday outdoes 2. It serves the theme better. You have much more engagement there. The gunplay is also absolutely more solid than the other two. Because in terms of gunplay, you absolutely can compare gunplay between all three, because all three of them have gunplay. And three's gunplay is absolutely better than 2, which is absolutely better than 1. 2 and 3 are on the same level then 1. In terms of powers, I would agree, but the tipping scale is going to be the gunplay. Controls, responsiveness, the choice of weapons you use, those matter way more in 3 than they do in 2 or 1. There's a better balance. The arenas are also much denser in 3 versus 2 versus 1. Like this, you have big old empty spaces. This one, you are in your environment, and that could be constrained, but it's not really anything that's there. Like, there's not really a cover system. And in this one, you have to be situationally aware. You have to be situationally aware of cover. You have to be situationally aware of your allies / removing health bars. So in terms of combat, 3 has a lot more going on than 2 than 1. I believe that results in a more rewarding and enriching system. So I think that's going to be my final judgment on that. I will say this though, for an action game, none of these 3 are good or great. None of these 3 are great. They just become less serviceable. Like all of them are tolerable to some degree. But Parasite Eve, even though combat is mainly what you do, combat is not, ironically, the best part of these games. It really isn't. Oh, you know what? That's what I'm gonna say instead of theme. Because theme we kind of talked about in terms of story as well. No, theme is still there. I'm gonna say theme, but also like world building. No, not world building. What's the word I'm looking for? Two evolves one's gameplay. Ugh, they overhauled the system. I wouldn't say they evolved it. They straight up threw away one and built two is what they did. I wouldn't say it evolved it. Um Cohesion? That's too generic. I think I will say world. In world we're gonna do world slash theme. Because in the world we're gonna do level design. So I think I'll say that levels at slash theme. Because that you can definitely talk about. Because all three of them are urban environments, and we can absolutely discuss the utilization of these levels. There is a lot of overlap in the level design. So yeah, Lynn, combat is 3, 2, and 1. This is the big point a lot of people are going to talk about now, creatures. Now, when it comes to creatures, we're going to talk about not just, enemy design, enemy variety, bosses, perhaps even visual appeal, which is really more of a subjective thing. Because there's going to be another category which is personal bias, and that's where I put the stuff that is absolutely subjective, such as how much. If the result in the rationale is how much did I personally like it, then it's not going to be part of this discussion. That's going to be stuff like music, like that is such a individual subjective thing that is not a criteria we can adequately debate between them. Like that's going to be a completely individual basis, and that's why it's not going to be any one of these categories. So creatures. Each one of these creatures is more or less tied into the story in so much that you have whatever weird biohazard threat is going on. In the first one, it's about Eve spurring on the mitochondrial reactions inside people. In some cases, it melts them. She uses them as raw material to build creatures that will serve her own purpose of evolving herself. Eve is a selfish creature. She's just trying to evolve herself. She's not there to evolve humanity. Even though Eve, or not Eve, Aya can benefit from that as somebody who ends up being compatible with it through to that transplant and ends up gaining and benefiting from that evolution as well. So she becomes an evolved human who's really no different, at a base level from Eve. That's kind of the whole thing, is that Aya and Eve are basically the same thing conceptually. They're both two selfish creatures, even though Aya isn't directly trying to do that, it just ends up being a victim of circumstance. The creatures in Parasite Eve 1 are also more or less victims of circumstance. They are not attempts of Eve to evolve them. They are literally there to be hazards to go out and collect material so she can birth the next thing. She's literally just out there trying to get drones to collect material so she can birth the next evolution. That's all Eve's trying to do, is just birth the next evolution. Basically, I'm heavily reminded of the Chimera Ant in Hunter x Hunter, that saga. It's kind of the parallels there. Uh but that aside, what do we have in terms of monsters and creatures in Parasite Eve 1? People remember the dog, people remember the rat. But do people remember the worms, the snakes, the bears? No, not really. There is presentation on 1 and 2 for creature transformations. There's multiple times when we see creatures like our they get their own little cutscene. You see you don't see transformations because transformations was brought up earlier. I think Gene brought it up. Transformations are less of a thing in Third Birthday. I think that's just more of just direction. You know, that's just more of like how much does the art team want to flex? Because just the existence of transformation, I think, is less interesting than what it transforms into. Because the first one is obviously there to be a cold open. It's there to be like, ah, look at this gross transformation. Even though it doesn't really fit the story in a significant way, it's just there for visual selling factor. It's complete trailer fuel. It's there to be part of the intro CGI cutscene to the game to get people to buy it. Like, that's more marketing, which is an indirect benefit of the game. It's not a direct benefit of the game. Like, there's no reason to focus on that. The bosses of Parasite Eve 1 is kind of a trick question because more than half of the bosses in Parasite Eve 1 are just Eve. Eve or Eve's progeny, that weird baby thing. That's literally it. Like half the bosses are that. I didn't like how a lot of the boss encounters um were just that where okay, I'm fighting Eve on the rooftop. I'm fighting Eve on this moving carriage that I can't really navigate past. Fighting Eve on the boat. And it's just you do damage to her, and then she goes off and says, "I'll see you. I'll get you next time, my pretty." The fact that she does that like 3 times, I think, is not good. That is like gaming 101, where it's like, ah, I beat you in the fight, but then in the cutscene, I just get away because reasons, and then I just kind of looks at her and just lets her go. It's just there to be a video game. Uh, in terms of the design of the monsters, let's take a look at two. Two fit the theming probably the best because the monsters served a purpose for the story. They weren't just meaningless throwaways. Every single creature in 2 served a purpose. It was a result of a botched Aya clone or a soldier that was trying to be part of the experiment to create augmented humans through NMC technology. There was no wasted enemy design in that entire game. Same thing for the giant bioweapon bosses. Each of them fit the storytelling much cleaner than one. I think the I think the design element for it is less gross out factor. They didn't really go for that element. They certainly had bizarre elements to them, like they would be very elongated people or have very misshapen, deformed aspects to it. I think deformity is the theme of two's design. One was there just to be like gross out horror for some of them. You know, they show a lot of blood on a lot of it. That's mostly just there. It's like, okay, here's a very decayed, desiccated creature, you know? Also a blob monster. Come on now. But in 2, all of them with a very artificial look. There was a lot of synthetic parts to them. A lot of them came like they all had this binding theme of being lab results. They were all lab creatures. Even when you were in the labs and you had like the giant lightning thing, like you still had the feeling of this is a lab experiment. The theming, the cohesion, as we said before, in 2, much stronger in terms of like how they utilize the creatures. They didn't have a boring monster in 2. One had boring monsters. As much as people want to talk about the high points of like the 2 examples they want to talk about, which is the rat and the dog and maybe Eve herself, in 2, there are no weak monsters. There's a lot of weak monsters in 1. There are no weak monsters in 2, and that's worth considering. The final Eve design, too, I think came out of left field. I think they wanted the final Eve design to look like Eve, versus the weird giant, again, mega baby. We kind of went with a mega baby again. We're trying to birth this thing. I also do appreciate in terms of the creatures, by the way, this is not tied to it, it's tied more to like levels and themes and maybe characters. But I do respect how in two, they understand that, hey, we don't need to have like a specialized unit of people just to fight these things. We can literally shoot them with soldiers, and that's good enough. And that's very true. Just conventional weaponry works better in this. In one, they try to be, it's like, the pyrokinetic abilities of Eve meant that conventional weapons are useless, so only Aya, the chosen one, can get close to her without spontaneously combusting. When really in reality, I guarantee if they dropped an orbital laser on anything in Parasite Eve 1, because the difference is only a couple of years, so we clearly had orbital nuking satellites then, that would have taken care of Parasite Eve in the first one. That was just, we need to have a video game here kind of logic. When it's like, no, we absolutely can use long distance stuff and that doesn't matter. Like, she has pyrokinetic abilities. That's not going to stop a bullet. Like the military tried very weakly in the first one, which I never liked, where it's like, oh, the military is completely useless. No, they weren't. They just chose to write them off that way. And two, the military was very effective and it was used in a logical way. Where it's like they were keyed in on the incident, they handle these monsters, you just put enough bullets into them and they die, which is what Aya does to begin with. You don't need mitochondria powers to just put a bullet in something. Believe it or not, if you shoot it enough times, it dies. And that level of creature interaction, I think, was important. And same thing for 3. In 3, conventional weapon absolutely work. And we also have an orbital satellite that shoots a death laser. It's very Hammer of Dawn from Gears of War, though, so if it's a very cloudy day, you can't use it. The designs of the Twisted, though, very alien. So that, I think, was the overall design theme of Parasite Eve 3. The powers in 2 are mutations. Eve's power in 1 was affecting others. Sure, I mean, they showed that where if you flew too close, she would melt you. But even that has a range. She didn't have infinite range. If she did, she could affect the entire city without having to move around. She didn't have infinite range. Like the Navy could have literally used the giant cannons on their battleship and shot her, and they didn't do that. It was very stupid. It was just artificially dumb. They just wanted to have a boss fight. In 3, again, you're using conventional weapons. Um, and like the use of the army, the National Guard, and the SWAT, and pretty much any armed person is used to take down pretty much everyone, including Aya. Which kind of prompted the whole thing. The usage of the Twisted itself, where all of them are offshoots of Aya. Again, Aya being the main problem here. Each of the Twisted also serve a purpose, more or less. There are some monsters in there that I think are just there to be hazard monsters. I think the utilization of creatures in 3 is probably weaker than 2. And I would almost argue weaker than 1. But they had, like, you had monsters that have very select abilities, like this monster can only be defeated this way, so I have to use a certain stagger ability or use a certain weapon, and this other monster creates shields, this other monster is a trap, and so you have to like blow it up or avoid it. They had a lot more gimmicks in 3. They were more creative with what the monsters do. In terms of what the monsters actually did, they were more creative in 3 than they were in the previous 2. They evolved the options that the monsters have. So it's very interesting. Each of them have strengths when it comes to the creatures. Like 1 gets points for probably presentation, and clearly people liked that presentation. 2 was just more functionally just consistent, and then 3 was probably the most creative. That one's challenging. One was a forced chosen one story, it was. One was absolutely a chosen one story. Literally, Aya was not needed in either of the other two. I mean, literally, she wasn't needed. There was even endings that support that, like, she's not needed. But in the first one, she's a chosen one, which is, not thrilling. But we have to have our sexy female protagonist. I'm undecided in three because all three of them are pretty even, to be honest with you. What can really tip the scales in terms of creatures? Trying to think, how can we really scratch the concept of creatures in a much more nuanced way of the Parasite Eves? Because thematically, all of them work to a degree. We already talked about like how, I guess we can say like, I don't know, maybe in relation to combat balance. I guess mechanically, I would have to say 3 is the most engaging. Because here's the thing, in 3, you are constantly prompted to be utilizing your powers, whether it's through overdive into the monster or overdiving into your allies. You have to use those mechanics to combat creatures at every given length. Always. In 1, your toolkit is there to make your life easier. Like, again, it's basically magic. And in 2, you kind of really almost don't have to use your power. Like, you can use it for, like, buffing and stuff like that, but you can get through 2 entirely on gunplay, pretty much. You can outgun your entire way through. Hmm. And again, in terms of, like, raw material, like, in 1, all the creatures are just whatever happens to be lying around. In fact, in 1, we actually don't have, people transforming, come to think of it. She just uses, like, whatever is lying around, because everything else is Eve. Like Eve pretends to be a human, and then like she's a creature, and then flies off, and then she uses whatever's lying around. People are just used as a raw material, so they're just melted. But you don't have people being utilized as raw material for monsters. That's used in 2 and 3. 2 and 3 they use people as monsters, which I kind of feel is a little bit stronger of an element. A lot of the monsters in 1 are throwaway. They're fodder. They're literally fodder. Like not just mechanically, but thematically as well. Like that's how they're used as fodder. I guess you can say fun factor then. As much as I don't want to lean that way. Is it more fun to fight the creatures in 1 versus 2 versus 3? Personally speaking, I want to say 2 was more fun than 3, which is more fun than 1. Man, we just all over the place when it comes to this. I don't know, chat. Any input from you guys? So I'm getting a lot of input from Franz, but I wonder if anybody else has any comments. I think it's mostly deciding between 2 and 3. 2 is better than 1. I would agree that 2 is better than 1 in terms of creatures. The fact that people will remember the first creature reveal, but not remember almost anything else, I think is more telling that 1 does not have memorable creatures. But between 2 and definitely 3, 3 you remember the bosses. 3 I would say has the strongest bosses. And 2 has um, really good incorporation of its moment to moment monsters while still having good bosses. I think what I'm gonna do is in terms of creatures, I'm gonna go two, then three, then one. One has the least usage of bosses, and the bosses they do use are not terribly interesting. Literally, the dog is the most interesting one in the police station. Everything else is dull. Even the crazy psycho baby at the end. Two does the crazy baby battle better than one does. And then three is just kind of in the middle on a lot of it. It does a lot of things well, but except for boss fights, nothing exceptional. Like the boss fights in three blow either of these two games out. The boss fights in three are probably the best part because they also have variety. Like there's some that are on the ground, some that you're in the air, some that you're floating in space, some that you're in a vehicle. It's like they do such a good job with a variety of boss battles in three that they don't do as creatively in two, and definitely not as creatively in one. So I think that's going to be my final answer on this. For creatures, it's going to be two, then three, then one. For characters, Parasite Eve 1, I would have to say yes, they're using characters that were made for them. I don't think any characters in 1, any of the main characters slash supporting characters, were original characters. I think they were all directly inspired by the fiction. I could be wrong. I could be wrong that even though because it's like a sequel, uh, maybe like none of these original ones were. I know Maida came over from Japan, and I don't know. Maybe they are original. I don't know. That doesn't matter. I will say though that your main character Aya definitely established an identity that people associate with the strongest. I think people associate Parasite Eve 1 Aya as the Aya they wish to see in all the other games. That's sort of she's sexy but strong, New York cop, has a partner that's actually badass. When it comes to like the sidekicks, dude, 100%. Your buddy cop in 1 is the best. He's absolutely the MVP. And Might in the first one, I agree that the way they wrote him in 3 is out of left field. If anybody has character assassination happening, it's Maida in 3. They wrote him in such a bizarre, weak way. I think the fact that 3 kills off a bunch of characters off screen doesn't help it. That's also true. And the fact that half those characters didn't matter. Like your FBI boss, who we speculate is behind a lot of the problems, we don't see what happens to him. He dies off screen, and his problems are also off screen or in cutscenes. Blank, his contributions are either in cutscenes and then he dies off screen. Gabrielle, who we don't even know why she's here. She's like, I just happen to be a third person. I guess you needed a third character to be a boss. Serves no purpose. Then you have Cray. It's funny because I remember their names more than I remember the names of other people in the other games. Um, he ends up being like, I have a sad backstory that I both tell you at the exact moment that it doesn't matter because it's resolved. The usage of 3, they incorporated more characters, but they incorporated more characters that are poorly done or don't matter, which is uh, hurting the process. So 3 suffers from that, absolutely. 2, you don't interact with many characters. You interact with Kyle, who is a useless piece of shit. You have recurring interactions with I can't remember his name, but the dude who has the dog. They try to make us care about your friends, like Pierce and the rest of them in the agency. We don't care. That plotline is handled off screen, which is also a detriment. Parasite 2, like a lot of the side plots that matter for I as like the side characters, supporting cast is either non-existent or don't matter. Even though the side character matters because you have to save the dog to get the best ending. And then you have Eve, who is fundamentally interesting, but she's literally comes at the very, very end of the game, and they don't have time to do anything with her other than the novelty of her being your clone, but evolved to do different things. She's a tortured clone. And then number nine, yeah, he has a gunblade. And then number nine was just kind of doing his own thing. He kind of went the Wesker route. He's like, yo, I'm a ticking time bomb. I'm going to die, but I'm going to go ahead and launch this um, giant biohazard baby. And then we're going to infect the entire planet. So if I'm going down, I'm taking everybody down with me. Oh no, I got eaten by a tentacle. So didn't do too much interesting with that. And then Kyle, I think, is also, they gave him way too much space. I think when it comes to the characters, the utilization of the characters, the support characters, it is very clear that Parasite Eve 1 is the strongest, followed by 2, followed by 3. That is easy, easy pickings. Number 9 is a more interesting character than most of 1. How so? Because him being a lab experiment gone mad, whatever. The fact that he's a recurring mini boss is could be interesting, but again, I think they did a better job with you and your buddy cop in 1. The relationship that you build there, the involvement of like his son, what he does to go out of the way to help you, to sacrifice for you, that goes a long way. He does way more to help you and support you than your buddies in 3 and definitely Kyle in 2. Aya herself is much more confident and competent in 2, but almost to a reckless degree. Like she's compromised in so many spots for almost no reason. Like I remember that there's 2 times when she's in trouble just to be in trouble and just for Kyle to save her. There was no reason for that. And the fact that they made her so inconsequential to the resolution of the game, I think kind of like hurt things. Because Aya is stronger, way stronger in 2 than pretty much everyone else around her, yet she's constantly getting in trouble and can't handle her own fights. She has to be saved by the military, she has to be saved by Kyle, she has to be saved by Nuclear Strike. You know, she gets plot armor in 2 more than 1, even though in 1 she's the chosen one. She gets dumb plot armor in 1, but at least in 1 we can justify that as being her powers are rapidly evolving to adjust her body and rise to the situation. So she gets that hero armor. Even though if Eve is so strong, she should, whatever, be melting Aya. She's really that much of a problem. But again, Eve is playing with her, trying to toy with her to find the ultimate organic living life form. Eve itself also needs to be considered as a character because it's the central antagonist in 1 and is not a central antagonist but is a plot point in 2 and is the character you play as in 3. In 3 they have the opportunity to really evolve Eve as a character, like going through with Amnesia nuked all of that. So even though it is evolving and adding more details to her character, which is more than we ever got in the other 2 games, obviously, because she was only in 2 and not 1, they still didn't go anywhere substantially interesting with it. She's like, okay, I'm not allowed to live my own life, whatever that entails. Eve is there to exposit the plot in 1. She's the type of mustache twirling villain who's like, haha, here is my plot and you cannot stop me. Ow, you beat me in a fight, I'll get you next time. And then she does that for 2 or 3 levels. Quite frankly, the antagonist in all 3 games kind of sucks. Hyde at least had a mission and had a plan. His boss fight was actually cool. I would say out of all the boss fights, the boss fight in 2 was the weakest. Fighting Eve in that one was very weak. And then fighting Eve in 1 is a joke because Eve melts and then births the giant baby that you have to fight, who's also not very interesting of a fight. He just shoots beams every now and then and teleports around. Wow, amazing. That's like literally half the bosses. And then in 3, though, you kind of it's a very anime fight because you fight Hyde, he's really strong, and then when you fall, your friends support you, and through the power of friendship, you get the edge you need to outplay the boss and then defeat him. It all seems very contrived though. Like when I really stop and think about it, all the boss fights in Parasite suck. Not like all the best fights, because like I said, the couple and two were actually really cool. Like the trash compactor one, and even the hotel boss fight. As goofy as that guy looks, he looks straight up goofy. He doesn't look like he belongs in this game at all. As goofy as he looks, that was still a more substantial boss fight. Because in that fight, you have stakes. You are on a timer. You can't just putz around. You have to save the dog. Um, but when it comes to characters, I think I'm gonna have to give it to one as definitely the first place, no doubt. I think it's the characters we wanted to see in one that we end up wanting to see in two and then three, and then I feel that's where some people's disappointment is spawned from, is because one became a template. Doesn't matter how much is original, how much is borrowed. That doesn't change the fact that that's still the template people are using to judge two and three on, and found them lacking. It really comes down to which I think is better, the character usage in two or the character usage in three. Because if anything, Aya in two is a weaker version of Aya in one, even though she's on paper stronger. She's a weaker character in two. She's much more take charge in this one. In this one, she's very passive. She's strangely beta in this one. And then Eve and Aya in this one. I don't think are well done. In fact, actually, I'm gonna go ahead and say on this when it comes to characters, Kyle sucks. The utilization of Aya is so brief, and it doesn't even matter. It's inconsequential, and Eve is wasted in terms of all potential, and most of the characters don't matter. So I'm gonna go and say it's not that two is better than three per se. It's better because three is worse for utilizing the characters. So for characters one, two, and then three, it steadily gets worse. The character writing gets worse as the series goes on. Take that as you will. Shout out to three though, where the conclusion to solving everything is killing Aya. But then they freaking wimp out, and it's like, oh, Aya died, but then we reset time, and then her soul is in time, and she's kind of alive, maybe, and she can sort of talk to you. That's stupid. That's weak. If you're gonna kill off your main character, kill off your main character and feel bad about it. One is the best, two has potential, three shoots itself in the foot. I think is you're right. That's pretty much the best way I'm gonna go ahead and go about it. One, two, and three. Last but not least is level design slash theme. And the reason why these seem separate but not really is when we think about it, how we utilize the environments in here, besides just being city or desert or urban areas in general, modern day urban areas, besides those, how well are those environments, just like combat and creatures, how well are they being utilized to work with the central theme for whatever that game is conveying? Which for the most part is evolution, whether it's evolution of you as the mitochondria, you as the evolution of the human species, or you as the evolution of creating a new species. Because in one, it's all about Eve wants to evolve the mitochondria form. Two is all about the neomitochondria is creating better humans in general, humans that can live longer, humans that don't have diseases, such so on and so forth. Is evolving humanity as a species. Three is all about creating a new species. So each of them tackle evolution in three different ways, which is interesting. But how does that tie into the usage of the levels when we're accomplishing that? With one, they went with a lot of very famous locations around New York. Locations that also were strangely devoid of people. Yeah, you could argue they were all killed off. Sure, that's the easy way to throw it down there, but when it comes to the strength of the themes, Franz, you're saying two, then one, then three. I would, I don't know. Two, I agree. I think the people utilizing two, I think two's overall theme and overall centralized drive, there's a lot of facets of the game that tie into that theme. The theming in two is the strongest. in terms of how it works together, its story, its characters, its creatures, its combat, and the level design. Because when you start off, you're um gosh, what are you doing in the very first one? You are in the that corporate building and you're seeing the aftermath of like these creatures, and then you see the transformation, and then you get the clue to go to the desert. And in the desert you see what's happening of these of like secret testing, and then you go and see what these creatures are doing. And when you go and you find what actually is there in the lab, that's what you see what these creatures are being used for. And the lab itself, these labs make me believe it's a lab. Like the small town makes me believe it's a small town that's been lived in. It's not terribly exciting to explore. It's only like a few areas, but it feels like a rundown motel area. So that much felt real. The office building felt like an office building. The lab felt like a lab. They had very authentic feeling environments for the main set pieces. In one, you had a lot of backgrounds, but none of the environments were fundamentally or functionally different. The police station, the sewers, the park, the Chrysler building, the Empire State, the theater, like aesthetically, they looked like those locations, but they felt like there were those locations to service the notion that this is set in an urban environment. Again, because Eve used just whatever things were lying around, it didn't matter that it was a theater. It didn't matter that it was a police station, other than using a dog. It didn't matter that it was a sewer, other than, oh, now we have crocodiles and snakes and bats down here. None of that really fundamentally mattered to the overall theming of it. I think it was just there to be an urban location and say that it's different. The locations themselves, like the power plant, um, looked and felt like a power plant. But what was the functional uses other than draining it to get to a blob creature? The fact that they went with the Statue of Liberty and using that island um, was good for set piece purposes. Like it looks good in a cutscene, but was there a reason we had to be there? Not really. It was just there to be. Like it's like the name and the recognizability was there. That was more important than the actual service of why did Eve choose that spot? Because it looked good in a cutscene. She technically could have chosen any spot. She didn't have to go all the way to the bay to do that. It could have been anything. Could have been the Empire State Building. Could have been the Chrysler Building, which technically it was in the extra ending. One did not service its environments or level design in an interesting manner either. A lot of them were very wide open spaces. You have random battles in this one because the other two you have enemies on the field, and two you have enemies on the field and you fight them in a battle scene, and three you straight up shoot them on the field, and in one you had random battles. And the environments don't matter because they just transport you to a battle scene. One has strengths because it's more grounded in reality before it takes a turn into sci-fi fantasy. But do we see that being reflected in the story though? Like, are the streets necessarily running amok? Because in most of the transitions as we travel between these locations, we're in our cop car driving through normal ass traffic, which by the way, you are never driving that fast in New York. That is a very inaccurate representation of New York City. You are never driving like 60 miles an hour anywhere on those streets. That is B to the S to the extreme. If they really wanted this to happen, if crap like that happened in New York, half the city would be pulling out their guns and gunning it down. That's what would happen. Because Eve wasn't present in all of those locations. So it's not like she would have been the threat where if you get too close you get nuked down and soaked up and absorbed. And the creatures were just creatures. Yes, they would have killed some people, but other than the pyrokinesis and melting abilities of Eve directly on site, there's nothing stopping conventional either authorities or the actual locals being there. We have no reflection of these locations being utilized in an actual interesting manner. I think the concept of the museum was cool. I think the museum is probably the most like the strongest example of tying in the level to the design of it because it used like creature exhibits to inject its opinion. They put out an evacuation order for the stuff at the park, I have to remember right. That is also functionally not realistic. You think for a second you're going to get millions of people to actually clear out of New York in a clean and time efficient manner? You have to remember this all took place in one night. You did not in 30 minutes evacuate the entirety of New York City. That's bullshit. That is absolute bullshit, even for a video game. It was just there because New York is a recognizable site. Like they did it for star appeal. That could have been any city. Like in the second game, in Parasite Eve 2, it takes place outside Los Angeles, but they don't cop out and go for all the scenic tourist sites in Los Angeles to base this game around, like Parasite Eve 1 did. They chose sites and locations that were directly tied to the plot. The locations in Parasite Eve 1 were not directly tied to the plot for the most part. Yeah, New York City population 1998 was 17.5 million. Thank you. You did not magically evacuate all those people in 30 minutes. Parasite Eve was not one night. Even if you had 3 days, let's go ahead and go for that 3 days. Because remember, they all start on Christmas Eve. I know it definitely passes one day because they do investigation on one part. It wasn't all of them was section of the city. Dude, do you know how many people live in a single block in New York City? You live up in the north, you know this. That still doesn't add credence to the fact that that is not what happens. Either way, that is a caricature of New York City. I would have preferred if they didn't use New York City because that's a joke. You want an accurate situation of New York City in a crisis situation? Check out the Die Hard movies. That's an accurate representation of New York City in a crisis. That's exactly how people on the ground level day to day life are actually going to handle threats and situations like that. That's realistic. Parasite Eve is a joke. Those people did not get gooped because of monsters, though, Franz. They only got gooped if Eve was there. Like, Eve went to the park because there was a big concentration of people there in the amphitheater. That's why she went to the park. Like, these levels were there to show the chase of Eve. Like, why are we in the sewers? Well, because Eve retreated through the sewers. Okay, great. But, like, whatever. But either way, two definitely took better level design and ideas from like one. I especially like the part where like when they were showcasing the NMCs and that sort of Jurassic Park pseudo thing with like the biomes and things like that, and using the NMCs in like security measures or as exhibits or as even as power sources. I enjoyed that they incorporated the results of the NMCs in the actual levels themselves. Like that's smart. That makes sense. Three is very similar to one. We just choose places like Spanish Harlem or the Rockefeller Center just because they're recognizable areas. It really doesn't matter. At least in the situation of three, the reason why there are no citizens there and people are realistically killed makes sense because the creatures there are constantly being refreshed through time loops. So even if you kill one, it's just going to regenerate itself. And you also have things like the Reapers that small arms cannot actually defeat. You have things that conventional sidearms and even large scale like military equipment cannot handle. So the approach, the rationale for the context of three is better than one, but the reason why they chose those locations don't matter. They could have been any location. And quite frankly, even though the levels are denser and they make use of the combat, like they're more interesting areas to fight in, and they have you do interesting things in some of those levels. Like some levels were on rail sections, some levels were chase sections, some levels were vehicle sections, some levels were objective based sections, and some levels were just normal shooter gallery sections. The variety in three is better than the other two, but the locations don't matter. They are just as inconsequential as one. And the Twisted, as much as the Twisted are again a new race, it makes sense that they're alien in a way because we're not evolving humans. We are literally creating a new race, and we have somebody else who wants to create a new race they're in charge of. The Twisted also aren't tied into any particular location in a meaningful way because yes, they have cores, and these cores need to be shot and destroyed. But again, they just happen to be in a subway. They just happen to be in this concert hall. They just happen to be in this office, but it didn't matter. The gameplay level variety in two or in three is better. Like the theming in three is better than one, but it's just as inconsequential. Usage of the level three is the best. Usage of theme two is the best. But two also uses its levels in a strong way too, so it wins on both those fronts. The problem is the theme isn't well done in either of these two games, quite frankly. Now these two games do levels in a good way. This one has better level design than one, but they're both pretty bad in terms of the usage. Two than three than one. I could go two than three than one. I could also go two than one than three. I think I'm gonna go two than one than three because the problem with the theme with three is that three introduces many plot lines such as the amnesiac Eve recovering her history, time travel, the plot of I don't remember the name of that of the group that you're in because they have once again just like in two a boss that betrays you and ends up collapsing from within. A lot of that stuff it doesn't like tie into it. There's one level where yes, you assist the FBI and you have to work with Gabriel and Cray. You get one level that supports the story in a meaningful way because of how the on the ground troops are there. But again, the level variety in 3 is just better, but the weakness of the themes and the fact that level design could have been done anywhere. I don't know. I almost feel it's worse than this because at least with the levels in 1, even though those levels were just there for name factor, the name factor at least stuck with you. And as much as I hate to admit it, it's still a point. They presented each one in a very attractive manner. Like, the theater was presented in a very attractive manner. The um, park was presented with its own cutscene and tragedy that was involved with it. The cinematic case for one carries it more than the cinematic case of three. So I'm gonna have to award the artists in Square Enix. Yes, I'm going to recognize the fact that you put in artwork and cinematics and CGI cutscenes, more effort in one than in three. Most of the CGI cutscenes in three are just there for the personal exposition of Eve when she's talking to people in the office. They're not there to present the levels or the conflict that's happening there. The conflict and what's happening in Parasite Eve 1 was used and presented more here. This one again did both better. So I'm gonna have to say that one edges out three. Again, three shoots itself in the foot a little bit more. So when it comes to level and theme, I'm gonna say two, then one, then three. Thank you, Lynn, for combining all that together. because wow, I thought because we are gonna only do 3 videos that are way shorter, we wouldn't run as long as time, and here we are, running the 3-hour mark again. Oh boy. Hey, that's the discussion for you. How are you guys feeling about this, by the way? I've been talking for 3 hours. You know what's gonna be interesting? Comparing 3 different games, speaking of 3 different games that are wildly different from each other, I wanna do the Chrono series next. Comparing Chrono Trigger to Chrono Cross to Radical Dreamers, which is a visual novel. Oh boy, that's gonna be interesting. Javier, Wesley, I'm glad you guys are enjoying this. Land, this is like a podcast style. It kind of is like a podcast, isn't it? But let's put a big old number on each of these. All right, so for Parasite Eve 1, you got 2 plus 1 plus 1 plus 3 plus 2. So the final score for Parasite Eve 1 is 9. Then you have Parasite Eve 2, which is going to be 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 3. Wow, I guess we kind of did overwhelming favor. It's like 13 for Parasite Eve 2. And Parasite Eve 3, you got 1 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1. Interesting. 8. So, without a weighted scale, this would be a good way to involve people in the server as a sign up style. Hey, I post these. I post these. It's up to people to show up and participate. Um, in a way, I'm almost glad that it's not a chaotic argument. It would be cool to have more people join in, but think about it. If I did this on the main channel, while we would get more people in at the same time, it would create a lot more chaotic, like drive-by opinions. I don't know. Maybe that chaos might be fun and interesting. Who knows? I think it would definitely distract me. So I think it's interesting that Parasite Eve 1 and Parasite Eve 3 rank so close to each other. Some people will be offended by that. That Parasite Eve 1 and Parasite Eve are very comparable in terms of the quality arguments that we have here for story, combat, creatures, characters, and level/theme. And there were many times when like they were very close to each other, honestly. Where they like in terms of story, in terms of creatures, in terms of theme, they were right there next to each other. It really wasn't that close. 3 has great ideas, but strays so far from the other two. That really is, I think, a big part of it. There were a couple times where 3 has ideas and it shoots itself in the foot for execution. So good idea, terrible execution. Overall, I want to point out, and I know this is going to sound like I'm throwing shade here, but in my opinion, Parasite Eve, the franchise, has never been great. At best, it's been good, but it's never been great. It has good ideas, but man, there's no staying power in any of them. And I think that's evident with how they have mixed things up so dramatically from them in between each other. Like, 2 may not have left a lasting impression on people, and I'm sure plenty of people resent the fact that 2 is so close to Resident Evil in design and execution. But at the same time, yes, it copied notes from RE, but it still did its own thing in many ways, and it did a good job with the way it was executed. And that's not a bad thing. You really do think being on the PSP hurt it? I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna argue that. But counterpoint to that, it's still a relatively new IP, and both of these were only on one system. Every single one of these were only on one system. And Silent Hill came after Parasite Eve, if memory serves. So people had standards for both survival horror and psychological horror by the time Parasite Eve 2 and 3, definitely 3, came out. So we had expectations by then. But regardless of what happens, Square tried something new. Didn't exactly work the best. But hey, at least the first two, like the first one sold 2 million, second one sold 1 million, third one sold 500,000. So it's not they were insignificant in terms of sales, but I really do feel the fact that it was Square Enix was carrying that in terms of name. I think it was if this series came out under any other publisher, it would not have done as well, in my opinion. Speaking of my opinion, let me add the weighted score now to see if that changes anything. So this is the unweighted score. It is Parasite Eve 2 at 13 points, Parasite Eve 1 at 9 points, Parasite Eve 3 or Third Birthday is 3 or at 8 points. Myself personally, if you were to present these three games and I had to pick which one to play, I absolutely had to pick which one to play again. Who am I kidding? I would pick two first, then three, then one. Because playing through one, in my opinion, was like misery. I did not have a fun time playing through one. The story and the interest and the intrigue carried that experience of wanting to know what was happening next. I did not like the moment to moment gameplay. The dungeons and exploration in that game were not good. Environments weren't interesting. Combat to me was just not a good system. I did not like it. I'm glad it died. So if we were to weight this, it would be Parasite Eve 2 at 16 points, Parasite Eve 3 at 10 points, and Parasite Eve 1 at 10 points. So my final tier ranking would be Parasite Eve 2 16, Parasite Eve 1 and 3 both tie at 10 points. How about that? Isn't that interesting? But you know, that's why we have these discussions. It's not like, this game's the best, and then these games are doo-doo butter. No, that's not how this works. This isn't a top 10 list. Um, Out of curiosity, chat, speaking out of just pure preference, not debate, not argument, it is pure personal preference. How would you order these in terms of what would you prefer to play? Doesn't matter. There's no counter arguments like, oh, I like the story more here, I like the characters more here. We already discussed all that. We just, in personal preference alone, what would you prefer to play out of these three? You're right, they're all doo doo butter. I'm just saying, I think people overestimate the value of Parasite Eve. I don't have faith in this series ever coming back. The series is dead. All right? This is a dead series. I do not believe people when they say they want another Parasite Eve game. I'm going to say that right now. If somebody tells me I really want another Parasite Eve game, these should be re-released. Okay, I will agree with you on maybe being accessible in the modern day, like through, you know, PSPP or Xbox Live or something like that. Just some accessibility, maybe even a collection, since Square sometimes does throwaways on those. Just having accessibility, I'm okay with preservation. But when it comes to remakes, I don't think so, man. I think they should just go ahead and try something new, like they're doing with Forspoken. I was about to say Forsaken, but I was like, no, it's Forspoken. What would you want to pick up and play? Three, then two, then one? Interesting. So you actually really valued three the most? Interesting. Didn't expect to hear that. Three was to me the most comfortable to play, but to me, like two was just like, in my opinion, like the journey was just as good as the moment to moment. It is the easiest to pick up. Yeah, I agree. Three is the easiest to pick up and play. Like when you pick up three, if you played literally any third person shooter, you've played three. It is very intuitive in its combat system. To me, three is a good time waster. From people that have put comments on three and said they really liked it, I've heard mostly from people where it's like, look, I happen to have a PSP, I picked it up, I shot some monsters, I had a good time, I walked away. And like, you know what? If that's all you're looking for, that's then yeah, three's a pretty good way to just kill some time and not think any deeper than that. And honestly, you shouldn't think any deeper than that, probably. Wesley going with one, then three, then two. I see, I see. Advocating for the old school, I see. If Parasite Eve did come out in the modern day remaster, you know, and I know, people are just gonna point to RE2 and RE3 remake and say, do what they did. That's what we want. You know they're just gonna ask for that style of the RE remakes. They're gonna be like, make the monsters really, really gross, like in Parasite Eve 1 with the rat and the dog, but give us like that modern day, really cool exploration environment usage and gunplay slash movement of RE remakes. You know that's what people are gonna ask for. Or people would probably go for the first person. Like make it a first person thing. I think Parasite Eve could do okay in first person. I would actually want to see something like Prey 2016 where you know you can choose to just evolve alien parasite powers and you have those different powers. That would be cool because you have the gunplay but you also have like your weird alien powers that really can kind of like change how you interact with enemies and the environment. You don't necessarily have to do it in the very non-linear way that Prey did it, but I think that would be a cool way to incorporate the fact that you have crazy powers. More than it's got to be here. Alone in the Dark. I was gonna say Alone in the Dark. Alone in the Dark was absolutely an action game, but at least it also had that you had gunplay mixed with weird supernatural powers. A lot of these have gunplay with supernatural powers. This is still such a stupid list. Hell Knight. I haven't even heard of this. Haunted Mansion is that the one based on the Disney movie? Come on. Oh, Half Life. Half Life as a horror game. Look, man, I can understand that you have like horrible creatures that come out, but I don't know about horror. You know, there certainly can be some levels that have a horror vibe. Blood Will Tell. I've never heard of it. Like, these also have European stuff. Like, some of this stuff did not come out in Japan. Bioshock 2 as well. Bioshock, like, I could see a case for the first game or the first level, like the intro being like pseudo horror themed, but they really dropped that immediately. Like, after that, none of the other levels play like that. D's. Skip D's nuts. Control is not a horror game. It's a very surreal supernatural game, but it is not a horror game. Speaking of past Square games, it would be interesting to go over the three Valkyrie profile games. I thought about that, but two things are inhibiting that. Number one, I still have yet to recap Covenant of the Plume. It's actually on the very short list right now. I'm in the middle of, I have it prepped I have it loaded in on an emulator to get footage for it, and I will be recapping that in the very near future. However, Valkyrie Elysium is also coming out, so that series isn't technically dead. So it feels premature to talk about the first, like the three Valkyrie profile games when we have Elysium. So it's a little premature on that. I want to kind of go with these series that we have that are dead or dead. But yeah, depending on how Elysium turns out, Valkyrie could be dead. It really that game is going to single-handedly determine the fate of the future of Valkyrie. I want to support it. I will buy it because I want to support it. I'm voting with my wallet, but I'm gonna be real. I have not been impressed by any of the gameplay footage I've seen so far. It does not instill a lot of confidence. Down for Shadow Hearts? Oh, absolutely. When I wrap up the next two Shadow Hearts games, we're absolutely going to talk about all four of the Shadow Hearts saga. At least I know I can come back here if I need to use it, because you got Kodolka right here. And. Wait, these motherfuckers have Kodolka, but they don't have Shadow Hearts? I thought I saw Shadow Hearts here. Hold on. Oh, that's the word. That was what I was looking for. Dimension on the 3DS. I actually liked these. These were cool. I was hoping to see those there. Days Gone is a joke. Don't even get me started. It's not a horror game. Oh, here's Shadow Hearts. But where's the other two? This is a dumb list right here. I almost don't even want to see the community rank of this horrible list. I almost don't want to see this. But yeah, the Shadow Hearts is absolutely going to be coming. But in terms of the series so far, I need to do Replicant. That way we can talk about the Drakengard and Nier games so far. And then Chrono is what we can do. We could definitely do the Chrono series. Because unfortunately, that series is absolutely dead. And we'll kind of go from there, to be honest with you. But yeah, I want to click this, but I know I'm going to be triggered. I know I'm going to be triggered, and I'm going to rant for another hour, and that's not what I want to do. I'm not. I don't. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I know exactly how I'm going to behave. I'm going to get triggered by whatever bullshit I'm going to see. None of these lists are going to satisfy me. I'm not going to click it. It's bait. Absolute bait. But in the future, if we ever do want to do I look at horrible tier, I argue with dumb tier maker list streams, if we ever want to do that, then tell you what, if you guys feel, yeah, Lynn, trying to get me to rant, I could rant. I absolutely could rant, but I'm not going to rant in this one. If we want to do I argue with dumb tier maker community rank lists, we can do that. We can absolutely have it where I don't create the list, but I look at other people's lists and argue with it. We can do that. That can absolutely be a stream. I used to do that on my own free time, where I used to just look at people's top 10 lists and look at it and argue with it. Give them hate views. I absolutely used to do that. And if you guys want to watch me give hate views on Tier Maker, or perhaps if you want to submit your own top 10 lists, we can do that. We could do a watch along. We can do an OBM Gets Tilted podcast. That literally could be a podcast. Could make the stream more interactive. You would absolutely be watching me raise my blood pressure, is what you would see. So if angry rants are what you want, yeah, you could do that. Just be still my beating heart. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming in on this one. It was good to have a lot of feedback on this. The critiques, the analysis, the discussion, even on just 3 games. Thank you, Resident Evil, for being a placeholder, because this game doesn't recognize their birthday, even though it recognizes some other bullshit. It's always a source of entertainment, isn't it? I think we may have evolved from early 2000s YouTube. You think that I absolutely know of some channels that still thrive on reaction videos and top 10 clickbait videos. You and I both know this, that there are absolutely channels still alive on just that low hanging fruit content. And if they're going to make low hanging fruit content, I absolutely can watch that low hanging fruit content and tear into it. At the very least, if we watch the low hanging fruit content, I'm only giving them one view and they're not getting the views of all you guys. So that'll stick it to them, right? But yeah, that concludes the stuff for this month. I just want to give myself a pat on the back for putting out a video every single week. I'm very proud of myself for that. I want to create a schedule with I can provide either medium length or short length ones in between the long ones that are coming. And there are some long ones I'm doing. But in between them, you'll get the nice bite-sized recaps of series that are still coming to the conclusion. I'll tell you what, I cannot wait until the Castlevania one. I cannot wait, but I'm gonna have to start that one early. I have a lot to say about Castlevania. I have a lot to say about that. Cannot wait. Um, and yeah, we'll pick this up next time. Next week, well, I know we said we're gonna do the Chrono one. We were actually not gonna have a stream on next Saturday. Next Saturday, I'm gonna be out of town. There will still be a recap posted on Friday. I'm just gonna set up a timer and it'll auto post itself. So please watch it. Uh, Fridays at noon Eastern Standard Time is more or less going to be the posting schedule. And if a video's longer than 15 minutes, it will probably be a premiere. And if you guys can just go ahead and check it out, absolutely. The most recent one is Bloodlines. Arguably, I think it is actually my shortest recap yet. It is the shortest recap, but it is actually one of the most important Castlevania games to the lore. It sets up a very important part of the lore history, and it is a prologue, a direct prologue to one of the best Castlevania games. That will be the next recap coming up soon. So, thank you very much for joining me. This experiment, I think, is so far pretty fun. I like this. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming in. Uh, we'll see what we do. Until then, if you want to keep up the discussion, I'm more than happy to always hear out or counter argue slash discuss slash exchange communicate ideas on the Discord, of which the description is in the link below. You will find links for other ways to support the channel as well, such as if you want to play along during precapitations or co-opitations, as I call them, which we will do as well. We'll probably do that in the future time if you are a member or patron member of a certain tier. So thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good night, and I will see you on the next battlefield.